Hi everyone and welcome to IDG Live. Today we have reached the end of our long series of videos just doing character studies of the Targaryen kings. We've reached the Mad King, Aerys II, the 17th and last Targaryen ruler to be sitting undisputed on the Iron Throne. Obviously there's a few others like Daenerys, Viserys, Fagon, of course, who perhaps we'll have a look at another time. But this is the end of the Targaryen reign and rule in Westeros. So what I will do, as always, I will try and frame this around questions I've got from my patrons. I'll try and get as many questions as I can from the chat as we're going through. But I will start off by talking through a little bit about the reign of Aerys II, because we tend to remember him just by the very last bit, the bit where he clearly was the Mad King. We know all of the events that lead up to Robert's rebellion, but what was he like before that? Well, he was born way back in the year 244 AC, which was during the reign of Aegon V. And he was one of the few Targaryens. I've got a question about this coming out later, which is absolutely fascinating when you dig into it. He was one of the few Targaryen kings who actually grew up knowing that he would be king. He was not next in line after Aegon V. His father, Jaehaerys, was. And we don't know huge amounts about his early life, but we do know Jaehaerys II, his father, was, and we looked at him about a month or so ago, he was clearly very focused in on prophecy, specifically the prince that was promised prophecy. And as a result, Charis forced Aerys to be marrying his sister. There were only two children. He married his sister Rhaella. Now, this was not a marriage out of love. This was not something that Aerys particularly wanted, not something that Rhaella particularly wanted either, it has to be said. And but they dutifully got married. And pretty soon they were expecting their first child. At which point, this was when Aerys must have been, I think, about 15. So still very young. And at which point, Aegon V, the king, summoned all of the family to Summerhall for a celebration of the birth of his first great-grandchild, who Rhaella was expecting any day. And also secretly, as we know, he was planning to be, or probably not so secretly, I'm sure other people were aware, he was planning to be hatching 7 dragon's eggs that he had found. That went wrong. The entire palace, castle, Summerhall burned to the ground. But while that was happening, Rhaella gave birth. And she gave birth to Rhaegar, who was the firstborn son of Aerys and Rhaella, and is the Rhaegar that we know from the sort of the backstory of Robert's rebellion. So this was quite a formative moment, I am sure, for young Aerys, because he's catapulted from being, just on a very personal level, from being the second in line to the throne whenever his grandfather, Aegon, who was still relatively young, he would then pass it on to his father, Jaehaerys, Aerys' father, Jaehaerys, and Jaehaerys would eventually pass it on to him. Probably Aerys thought this is still quite a long way away before he became king. But that all got accelerated, and he suddenly was next in line. And he's already got a son and heir to take over after him. The Targaryen family tree, which had been massive, had now come down to just this one line. Pretty much everybody else was gone. It was just this one line. You had Jaehaerys, and then and his wife, and then you had their 2 children who were married, and then they had a child, Rhaegar. Jaehaerys only ruled for 3 years, and Aerys took over as king at the age of 18. So very young to be king. But the start of his reign was actually pretty positive. He seems to have been an able student without ever being particularly intellectual. He seems to have been a reasonable fighter without ever setting the world alight. He seems to have been reasonably charismatic. He certainly had vision. He had great hopes. He was telling people as he was becoming king that he wanted in years to come people to look back and remember him as Aerys the Great. That was the idea. He had very high hopes for himself. He was becoming king very young. There was no reason to think that he wouldn't reign for decades to come. And he very quickly established himself as king by getting rid of all of the old courtiers, the old people who'd been there surrounding his father, Jaehaerys, and Aegon V before him. He got his own people in. And top of this list was Tywin Lannister. Tywin Lannister was 20 at the time and was made Hand of the King. So Tywin, very young to be Hand of the King as well. He was also very good friends with Steffon Baratheon. That's the father of Robert Baratheon, Stannis, and Renly. Now, the three of them had met and had fought together during the War of the Ninepenny Kings, and they'd forged a really close bond, the three of them. Tywin was just ahead of them. He was a couple of years older. He was a knight by that point, and he knighted Aerys at the end of that, once he'd proven his worth. So we have a new young king arriving in King's Landing, and he soon turns into a king who has these grand visions. This is probably the defining characteristic of the first few years of his reign. He had these huge visions of things that would be amazing, but are probably quite impractical. I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one was he saw dawn and thought, this is just a desolate wasteland. There's deserts everywhere. How do we get water into dawn? And then he thought, well, the Rainwood's not too far away. Why don't I order the construction of an underground canal that goes from where all of this rain comes under the mountains into Dawn, and then we can have a canal network which can irrigate the entire land, and we can turn Dawn from being this desert into somewhere which is incredibly lush and vibrant. Really great idea, but far too ambitious. And he held on to this for a very short while and then seems to have completely forgotten it. Another example of one of these massive ideas he had was he said, having spoken to some people from the north, he thought, so we've got the wall, which is at the top. That's the top of the Seven Kingdoms. Why don't we build another wall 100 miles further north? And then we can claim that extra 100 miles and we can expand the Seven Kingdoms that way. We can just build a second wall. And again, he was very excited about this for a few weeks and then seems to have just quietly forgotten about it. Meanwhile, in the background, Tywin was quietly but very, very competently running the Seven Kingdoms. One of the first things that he did was he rolled back, and we don't know all the details of what these are, but under Aegon V, a huge amount of new laws had been passed that took rights away from the lords of the land and gave them to the small folk. Tywin rolled all of that back. He gave the power back to the ruling lords. He then also did the boring but necessary things of how to actually build a functioning country. He built roads. He upgraded roads that were already there. He built roads along routes that needed them. He went and had a proper look at the taxes across the piece. He reduced port taxes. So the lords of the realm liked him because he'd given them their powers back. The traders, the merchants of the realm liked him because he'd given them more money. And the small folk liked him because he was helping out in the boring, normal things. I say liked him because he was probably not getting all of the credit for this. Aerys was still very much, in the first few years, interested and engaged in what's going on. Although the deeper into his reign, the more people started acknowledging, saying that the person who's wearing the crown is not actually running the country. The person who's running the country is Tywin Lannister and not Aerys II. So that starts a very long, slow, simmering cause of contention between the two of them. But, as I say, to start with, all is reasonably good. Aerys also, he seems to have a very short attention span. That's one of the other things which is very noticeable here. He has a whole string of mistresses, one after the other. It's not like we get comparisons with Aegon IV, if you can remember back to him, Aegon the Unworthy. This is where all the great bastards came from. It's not like that. What Aegon IV seems to have done, it was he got himself a lover and then he made her his official mistress for a few years. It never lasted that long with Aerys. It was just a matter of a few weeks, maybe 6 months for a particular favourite, and there would just be this kind of like rolling carousel of these women that he would be having affairs with. And while that was happening, though, his wife was suffering from a series of miscarriages, and in total, I think there was something like 8. This wasn't always miscarriages. Sometimes the child would be born, but live only a few months and then die. And Aerys started to get increasingly concerned about this, and also increasingly starting to sort of point fingers. This clearly wasn't his fault. This was clearly Rhaella's fault. And he started to accuse her of having affairs. And this must be the gods against him somehow. So the first few years started out quite well, and then there's these slowly building tensions going along. When we, I think the next thing to probably point out is where the slowly building tensions start to get a problem between him and Tywin, because increasingly Tywin, he became Lord himself during this period, and increasingly people were looking to him to be providing the leadership. But then he married. Tywin married his cousin, Joanna Lannister. Now, we could talk a huge amount about that relationship because it was really quite pivotal in the life of Tywin. She, we're told, is the only person who could ever make him smile, or apparently even laugh sometimes. And he clearly was very, very much in love with her. However, Aerys also had his eye on her. And as the king, what he wanted, he got. During the wedding, Tywin and Joanna, then we're told that King Aerys took unwanted liberties during the bedding ceremony. We're not told exactly what that is, probably mercifully, but clearly this was something which angered Tywin. And then at some point, relatively quickly after that, Joanna Lannister was thrown out of court by Rhaella, Queen Rhaella, who had a habit of, if she found that somebody was having an affair with her husband, not all the time, some of it she just turned a blind eye, but if she thought this was an important one, then she would evict that woman from court. The rumours obviously started spreading. And over the course of the next few years, this rumbled on. We get a number of incidents of where Aerys makes inappropriate comments where it seems that he clearly oversteps the mark. Tywin, we know what Tywin's like, and Tywin was even more like Tywin, I suspect, when it came to his wife. He had to suffer in silence because this was the king doing it, and the king had all of the power in this relationship. So this rumbled on for many years. There were rumors about the nature of that relationship. There was a crazy time when Tywin laid on a tourney, Casterly Rock, or Lannisport, and the king came over. He left the queen back home. The king came over and then stayed for a year. Now, this wasn't because he really loved his great friend Tywin. There was clearly some other reason why he stayed a year. Anyway, the Lannister children were born. I'm not going to go down the digression. We can talk about that if you want to, but I'm not going to go down the digression right now about the potential for maybe one or more of the Lannister children actually being Aerys's children. But the hints are definitely there. This rumbled on, and it reached a kind of a peak at what became known as the Defiance of Duskendale. And this is something I sort of mentioned it briefly last time, but this was a real turning point. This is a real hinge moment for the king, the year 277. He'd been in power by this time for 15 years. And Duskendale was a port just north of King's Landing. And over the previous 2-3 centuries, it had gone from being an incredibly rich and prosperous port to actually almost nobody docked there anymore. It was becoming very impoverished. This is because King's Landing had grown up during that time, and all of the ships that wanted to come into the east of Westeros, they used to, if they would come up towards the Blackwater Rush, they would stop off at Duskendale, but now they wouldn't do that. Why on earth would they? They'd much rather go to the big city, so now they're all stopping off at King's Landing. This was causing a problem for Duskendale. And Lord Darklyn, the Darklyns of Duskendale, decided that he wanted basically a tax break. He looked at Dawn and saw that Dawn had slightly different rules to everybody else in the Seven Kingdoms. They could keep their prince, just as a random example. They could keep their own inheritance laws. They basically, when they joined the Seven Kingdoms, they had their own rules. And he thought, well, why can't Duskendale? So he put this to the king, and Tywin dismissed it out of hand. And then he said, okay, I hereby invite the king to come here. Let's talk about it. Let's decide what's going to go on. And Tywin said, Aerys, just don't do it. There's no benefit to this whatsoever. This is just a castle and a town. They're asking for something that this would set a precedent. We don't want other people thinking, oh, well, we can come in and cut our own deals with the crown. Just don't do it. But Aerys by this point was starting to get really quite paranoid, particularly about Tywin, to the extent that when Tywin was suggesting something, his instinct was now to do the exact opposite. So he went with a small group of people to be there protecting him, a small honor guard, basically. He went up to Duskendale and he got captured by Lord Darklyn and kept in the Dun Fort, which is the castle there at Duskendale. Tywin obviously had to respond. He got an army, he went up and he started besieging Duskendale. But Lord Darklyn was saying, well, I'll let him go when you agree to my terms. And Tywin was going, well, no, we're not going to just release him. That's the whole thing. And Lord Darklin eventually, once they starting to get starved out, things were not good. He started saying, "Okay, let's parley. We'll just meet up under a peace banner, and we'll have a parley. We'll talk to each other, see whether we can work out some kind of deal." And every time Tywin said, "No, you just have to release him and submit 100%. There's no negotiation here. There's nothing else." And eventually, Lord Darklin's saying, "If you attack, I will kill the king." And so it was this impasse. Eventually, though, 6 months in, Tywin seems to have got a bit frustrated by this because, nothing's going to happen. So he says, "We will attack tomorrow. It doesn't matter." And the small council were there, and some of them, we're told, were like, "Well, are you sure about this? Because this does mean that he probably will kill the king if you attack." And apparently Tywin said, "If he does, he does. We've got a great next king here," pointing at Rhaegar. "It'll be okay." Which is, it has to be said, just hinting a little bit of treasonous there. Happy for the king to be killed and for his heir to be taking over. But enter Sir Barristan Selmy, Barristan the Bold, who says, goes to Tywin and says, "Just give me a chance. Let me try and get him out. Just me, single-handedly. I'm Kingsguard. This is what I have to do. This is my duty, is to protect the king. And the king, as far as we know, will be executed within a day when you start attacking. I need to go in and try and save him somehow." And so Tywin goes, "Okay, fine. That's it. This is a stupid idea. Can one person possibly break into a castle, get down to the prison, get the king, take him out, rescue him, save his life, survive against an entire army? There's no chance." But this is Sir Barristan we're talking about, who is legendary. If you just think of him as the old man, no, he does do legendary things. So he scaled the walls of Duskendale. He disguised himself as just a beggar. He made his way to the castle. He managed to sneak into the castle. He managed to work his way all the way down to the dungeons. He somehow managed to free the king. He took the king out, bringing him out of the castle. A couple of times he got stopped. He killed the people who were stopping him. They kept going. They made their way to the stables. They managed to get on horses, somehow managed to make sure that the gate was open. He with the king, rode out, saved the king single-handedly. Sir Barristan Selmy saved the life of the king. And this meant that Lord Darklin basically had nothing. He had nothing left, and he had to surrender and give up. And he and his whole family, they were killed. But the impact on Aerys was huge. It seems that the long simmering paranoia which was there, which was not always unfounded, but quite a lot of it was, this really started to boil over. A couple of things. Firstly, he says this would not have happened if we had dragons. This is a very typical Targaryen response. This would not have happened if we had dragons. He somehow manages to find some dragon eggs, 3 dragon eggs, I think it was, from somewhere on Dragonstone. For 6 months, tries to get them hatched. It doesn't work. What happened to those dragon eggs is a fascinating question. But anyway, he tried to hatch dragon eggs. It didn't work. But he became increasingly obsessed by fire, and this played its way out. If he couldn't have dragon fire, he wanted to have wildfire, and he started promoting the pyromancers, the people who could be producing wildfire for him. He was always quite cruel with his punishments, but increasingly they became fire-based, wildfire-based. He went worse and worse down that route. And the second thing was that if he was paranoid about Tywin Lannister before, now he absolutely 100% was. He'd heard that Tywin had said, if he dies, he dies. We've got a good alternative here. And became convinced that Tywin and Rhaegar were in league to be getting rid of him as king and putting Rhaegar on the throne. Tywin probably didn't help by then pushing hard to try and get Cersei married to Rhaegar, because Rhaegar didn't have anyone. He didn't have another Targaryen sibling to be marrying, so he did need to be marrying someone. At which point events start speeding up. Jaime is there, and he gets made. This is towards the end of this period. He gets made, or Aerys announces his intention to make Jaime a member of the Kingsguard, which is an incredibly harsh move for Tywin, because Jaime was set up. Jaime was his heir. Jaime was going to inherit Casterly Rock. He was the future of House Lannister. If Jaime became a member of the Kingsguard, he could not have children. He could not inherit Casterly Rock, and it would actually all go to Tyrion, who everybody knew that Tywin despised. So that was a really harsh move there. Tywin immediately resigned or offered his resignation as Hand of the King, and this was accepted. Aerys accepted it. He then went through a series of like 3 Hands of the King in quite a short period of time, but he put in place loyalists to himself. With Rhaegar, he became incredibly convinced that Rhaegar was turning against him. Rhaegar married Elia Martell, and very swiftly had 2 children, as in he's like 2 children in 3 years. Aerys didn't even attend the marriage ceremony. He wouldn't even go to the Great Sept because he was so convinced that people might be about to assassinate him. When he was presented with the firstborn child, he holds it and says, "Smells Dornish." He hated this. The 2 parts of the court separated. Rhaegar and Elia went to live on Dragonstone, whereas Aerys stayed in King's Landing. Grand Maester Pycelle, when he was writing back to the Citadel, he wrote that it felt then very much like the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons. So the things that we've been seeing on House of the Dragon, we saw in season 1, where you get these 2 groups who are clearly against each other. They're just waiting for something to push things into war. That was the feel that we had there. And Aerys also started getting, because he was so paranoid, he thought, I need to know what's going on. He brought in Varys. I'll talk a bit more about this later. He brought in Varys to be his Master of Whispers, to be the person who was informing him, telling him what was going on in the Red Keep and wider around in the realm. What is everybody actually up to? And Varys is there. We're told he was almost always there at the king's side, just whispering in his ear. So we have this situation in the build-up to Robert's Rebellion. We have this situation where the court is split. The heir has children now of his own. He has supporters, particularly as Aerys is becoming increasingly cruel. He is becoming increasingly, people are saying he's mad. He starts to look mad. He doesn't cut his hair. He doesn't cut his nails. They grow long and sharp and jagged. He becomes known as King Scab because he gets cut so often on the Iron Throne when he's sitting on it. He has all these bleeding sores. he does not look good, and he becomes increasingly cruel to his wife Raella. The good news for him, though, of course, is that he did finally eventually have another son, Viserys, and this, if anything, just increased his paranoia. He had another son that he had to look after, and made Viserys's upbringing for his first few years as a baby and as a young child were, to say sort of coddled is not anywhere near it. He would not allow anyone to be alone with Viserys. Viserys was always being guarded. He could not leave King's Landing. He had even when he was breastfed from a young age, when his mother's milk gave up and they had someone else providing the milk, he had his food tester test that milk to make sure it wasn't poisoned. This was the extent to which his kind of paranoia around Viserys grew. So all that needed to happen was some kind of ignition, because this was not a situation that could be sort of kept up long term. And that came with the year of the false spring, which was 281. So this is actually, things have moved really quickly. This is only 4 years after Duskendale. The year of the false spring, there have been 2 years of winter, and suddenly everywhere things seem better. This seems like spring is here, and a great tourney is announced, the tourney at Harrenhal. Now, the conspiracy theories were that this was not this Lord Went had set up this tourney, but the prize money was so high that people started to think there's somebody else behind this. This isn't just Lord Went wanting to do a nice big tourney. There's someone here who's wanting to make sure that all of the lords of the land come and gather at Harrenhal. Varys basically told Aerys, who had refused to leave the Red Keep by that point for years, he told him the person behind it was Rhaegar. We don't know all of the ins and outs of this, but what seems to have been the case in some way, how far down this plot went, we do not know for certain. But Rhaegar was wanting to get the Lords of the Realm together to talk about what to do about his father. This isn't just I'm plotting to get rid of him. Do they perhaps set up a regency? Do they try and get him to do to abdicate? What's the best way forward? Because clearly Aerys by this point was not acting in a rational way. However, Varys discovered this and told Aerys, you have to go there. You have to go there to prevent this from being a pseudo great council, a great council in all but name. So Aerys did turn up, and whatever had been about to happen at the tourney at Harrenhal didn't really happen. However, that is obviously where Rhaegar and Lyanna met. And following on from that, we get the events that lead up to Robert's Rebellion. I won't dwell on all of the build up to Robert's Rebellion, other than the obvious role that Aerys himself played in providing the spark for this. When the rumor went out there that Rhaegar had abducted Lyanna, Brandon Stark and his friends charged down to King's Landing and demanded Rhaegar. Basically, they demanded Rhaegar's head. And Aerys, even though he had an incredibly strained relationship with Rhaegar, he could not allow this. He could not allow random lords riding up to his gates demanding satisfaction against his son, a Targaryen. And so he had them all captured. he summoned their fathers, and then he killed them in horrible, horrific ways. And then he summoned Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark, and Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark basically said, well, no, that's not happening, and that's where the rebellion came. The whole rebellion actually took quite a long time. From sort of very beginning to very end, we're talking 18 months or so. This is actually quite a long period of time. And through it, Aerys seems to have become increasingly exasperated by the fact that Rhaegar isn't showing up. Rhaegar's the cause of this from Aerys's perspective. Rhaegar was the cause of this, but he was not showing up for this to help. Also, Dorne were not showing up to help. So he's becoming, and the Lannisters, who knows whose side they're on, they're just staying quiet. Tywin is staying quiet. So he's faced with this massed force of the Tullys, the Starks, the Arryns, and the Baratheons, which is a significant amount of opposition, and his own support just seems to be kind of leaking away. But eventually he gets Rhaegar and he gets the Dornish on side. The Battle of the Trident happens, and word reaches him that they lost. Rhaegar's dead, and now Robert Baratheon's army is going to be marching on King's Landing. Tywin Lannister's army is also marching on King's Landing, but nobody knows whose side they're on. Tywin's gets to King's Landing first. Are they joining up with Robert Baratheon? Are they going to be attacking? Or are they going to join the Targaryens, and that would probably turn the tide of the battle back for Aerys? They let the Lannisters in the gates, and it's a bad move. Meanwhile, inside, Aerys is getting more and more frantic, and he knows what's happening, and he basically then decides that he has wildfire caches throughout the city, and he's going to get them all lit. He's going to blow up the city. I've got a couple of questions about that, so I will come back to that a little bit later. But Jaime, who has been there at his side all the time, he's heard all of this. Eventually, he has a pang of conscience, perhaps. Perhaps he also realizes that the Lannisters are on their way, and he has to stop this. He breaks his vows. He kills Aerys there on the spot. And that is the end of Targaryen rule in Westeros. The Mad King was remembered as the Mad King. I've said many times going through this, Targaryens being mad, this is, we bandied the word mad around. It's probably fair to say that Aerys, more than most, did show some signs of what we might now call in sort of mental health disorders, huge amounts of paranoia, clearly this huge love, cruel streak, sadistic streak. There was lots going on there. And so it's undoubtedly he was remembered in the way that the second half of his reign went. But the first half of his reign actually was a time of relative peace. So although we think of Aerys II as the Mad King, that's really just the last few years of his life. If you had to really focus it in, you would say after the Defiance of Duskendale 277, which just leaves him 5 more years left. So who he was as a younger man, he still had a lot of these same tendencies, but he had good aspirations. He tried to do good things. So Aerys II was a lot more complex of a character when you look at his entire life than when you're just looking at the last few years. Okay, so let's dig into the chat. I have a feeling I might have missed a few, so let me just head back out and see whether I can pick the questions up. So first of all, Maura Lee, hi there. Maura saying, just a gift of love, appreciation and support for all fabulous content, merch and stories on the 3 channels. Thank you for all that you do for mods and patrons. Hoping that me and Dan the dog are well. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Jay Carroll saying, thanks for helping me get through the second half of my workday. You are very welcome indeed. Flopfire 13 saying, keep trucking, Robert. Love your work. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so that's where we are in the chat. Let's go to some questions about Duskendale then, because Duskendale was a really important and hinge moment, which I hope I emphasized enough when I was going through the sort of the background of his story. I've got a question here from Jay saying, hey Robert, some speculative questions about Duskendale. What do you think happened to Aerys there? What do you think Tywin wanted to happen there? Also, can you go into some detail about how it came to be that Varys was brought to Aerys? I'll talk. Well, actually, why don't I talk about the Varys bit first, and then I'll talk about Duskendale. So, the situation with Varys was that Aerys was starting to realize that, or he was starting to become very paranoid, and he thought everyone was out to get him, and he realized that he didn't know everything that was going on. And he decided that he was in need of a Master of Whispers, which is something which, if you're going back through the history books, that this post has been filled several times before. Larys Strong had it. Lady Messalina had it. So a few people had this role of being like the king's spy master, the person who's in charge of the information. So Aerys had this need, and he decided that if he was to trust somebody, because this was a position that needed a huge amount of trust, if he was to trust somebody, it couldn't be somebody in the Seven Kingdoms, because he was already wondering, well, how many of these people are against me. So he thought, I'm going to go further afield. And if we come from Varys's side, what we have with Varys is a child who was an orphan, and apparently a slave, at least to start with, and he then became a member of this theatre troupe which went around the 3 cities. We know the bit of backstory about a wizard, a magician, who bought him and cut off his bits, and then after that discarded him. This is the end bit of the story. It's just like, he didn't kill Varys, he just discarded him. He left him out on the street. So what's Varys to do? He's now got literally nothing anymore. His old master didn't want him back. He doesn't have any parents. He doesn't have any friends. He struck up a friendship with a very young Illyrio, and they together came up with this scam where they would, or Varys would steal from thieves, basically. And so if a thief robs the house of a nobleman, Varys would steal from that thief, and Illyrio would approach the nobleman in question and basically say, hey, I think I can get hold of your goods that just got stolen from you in exchange for a reward. And they agree, and Varys then hands it to Illyrio. They get the money. This scam seemed to work quite well. And then Varys started to realize that actually the greatest commodity was not the actual stolen goods, it's the knowledge, it's the information that he was getting, because he started setting up what was a sort of a proto version of the Little Birds, and that's sort of a spy network throughout the city of Pentos. And he started learning so much of what was going on. And then suddenly this wasn't just a business where if you had something stolen, you can have a retrieval team go and get it for you. This is information, keeping hold of information, perhaps a little bit of blackmail here, perhaps a little bit of somebody's paying for information over there. And he built himself basically as an independent spy master in Pentos. This coincided with Aerys, who was then looking for a spy master who was not from Westeros. And Pentos is, pretty much as close on Essos as you can get to Westeros. Word reached Aerys, and he hired Varys, who no doubt saw the potential to be moving from just a city to the Seven Kingdoms. So that's the story behind how Varys ended up there. Let's go to a couple of questions. Nicole Knox saying, "Hi Robert, how do you think Aerys would have responded to his first daughter? Similar paranoia and treatment to Viserys." So this is Daenerys. So Daenerys was conceived during that last 2 weeks. So Aerys never knew that he had a daughter on the way. By the time he dispatched Rhaella and Viserys off to Dragonstone, he had no idea that Rhaella was pregnant. How would he have reacted? Yes, probably with similar paranoia, perhaps slightly less than Viserys, because Viserys was the elder, the male, and therefore at that point then the heir. But yes, I have no doubt that he would have been as paranoid with Daenerys as he would have been with Viserys. AK Channel TV, hi there, saying, "Hello Robert, long time. Excited to buy a Bloodraven t-shirt." Yes, if you're interested in Bloodraven t-shirts, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. There's somewhere down there should be a link. Was Aerys' failed relationship with Tywin the beginning of the end? Most problems stemmed from that. Yes, I think it's probably fair to say. I mean, Tywin is many things, but he's definitely competent. And if Tywin had stayed close to Aerys, if Tywin had stayed managing things for him, then it's probably fair to say that he would have been in a much stronger position. But Aerys's descent down into the really dark place that he ended up was that would have happened anyway. And so it's not like they just had a breakdown in relationship. The problem was the deterioration in Aerys's mental health. Basically, if we look at it in those terms, that was the problem which caused the Tywin issue. Because Tywin, it would appear, his grand plan, to start with at least, was he was going to be Hand of the King and basically running the Seven Kingdoms. Then he would marry Cersei to Rhaegar, and their children would then be sitting on the Iron Throne. And that seems to have been his plan. So this wasn't... yes, eventually he started to think a little bit higher than that, but certainly until relatively late in Aerys's reign, that was the plan. Roman Lakovet saying, "Why does Doran," this is Doran Martell, "continue his quest for revenge when everyone who was responsible for the deaths of Elia and her children is gone?" I mean, I don't know if you're talking once we have Tywin himself in the books is dead. Is Doran on a quest for revenge? Well, I think he's on a quest to return his family to the place that they once were. he married his sister to the heir to the throne, and their children would have been on the Iron Throne. And that was taken away from Dawn. So it's a bit more subtle than this, but if you look at Donna Martell's cunning plan, it basically seems throughout most of A Song of Ice and Fire to be, I'm going to marry one of my children to a Targaryen. And first of all, he tries to he has a secret engagement with Viserys. And then when that doesn't work, he's thinking of getting Quentyn married to Daenerys. He has this upcoming, when Fagon is arriving, he goes, oh, is this another Targaryen? Maybe I'll send my daughter off to meet him. His plan is just marrying into the Targaryen royal family. So is he after revenge? I don't know if he still is on specific Lannisters. I think he's very happy, though, to kick them out of power. Andrew Kay saying Tywin turning on Aerys II was nearly inevitable, given the treatment he suffers. Joanna, years and years of slights and derision and near total lack of appreciation for Tywin's competence. Yeah, absolutely. So there was, I kind of skated over the top of it. There were lots of moments when Aerys was just, he delivered slights to Tywin Lannister. Another one, as things were starting to get worse, was I mentioned one of the things that Tywin had done was to be reducing the port fees, which was very popular with the merchants and obviously with the port cities. Aerys raised them. Then everybody was up in arms. This is terrible. This is a disgrace. Why are you doing this? And then Aerys reduced them, claiming that he reduced them. Tywin had put them up and he'd reduced them. And he got all the credit for it and made Tywin look really bad. The events happen again and again and again, but at its heart, what happened with Joanna Lannister, that will have really, really meant huge amounts to Tywin. The fact that he managed to not act on it for so long is pretty impressive. So I think I said I was going to talk about Duskendale a bit, so I've got some questions. Jay was asking what happened to Aerys there and what do I think Tywin wanted to happen there. So what happened to Aerys? I mean, with this, I tend to, yes, you can, if you want to, you could come up with a really good conspiracy theory about, this was all provoked and prompted and things like that. But I tend to think that actually the way that we're told that this pans out does kind of, it kind of rings true. What happened with Aerys? Aerys spent 6 months locked underground in a prison cell. Now, and he emerged a different person. Now, I think anybody locked up for 6 months would emerge a different person. But Aerys, by this point, is already starting to be really quite paranoid about what's going on. And let's not forget, he spent his entire life, from the moment he was born, he knew he was going to be king. He's had people fawning around him. He has now got to the point of this isn't just Tywin's people around him. He was appointing his own people around him, lots of yes men and yes women. He could have any woman he wanted. He could eat any food he wanted. He could do anything he wanted. And then to take that and put him into a prison cell, that will have had a devastating effect on him and his mind. So that just makes sense to me. As for what Tywin wanted, does seem to me by this point their relationship has deteriorated hugely. I think he does not want to be seen as the person who is killing the king himself. But at the same time, I think he is reaching a point where he's going, actually, this isn't a good king. We could just put Rhaegar on the throne. So I think he saw this as a win-win situation for him. He's doing absolutely everything that he's supposed to do. Nobody could argue against him. He'd cautioned the king against going in the first place. Then he immediately rallied an army and set up a siege. He's accepting nothing other than the king coming out in a full and complete apology, which from their side, actually, that is what they need. And he held back for 6 months before doing anything. He even allowed Sir Barristan to go off on his hero run to try and save the day. So from his perspective, he was actually doing everything. Nobody could actually fault him. But if, as a result of his actions, the king died, then actually we've probably got a better king now. Zakalok saying, bonjour, Robert, bonjour to you. Do you think it's possible that the defiance of Duskendale was purposely provoked by someone in order to either kill or diminish Aerys in order to take control after? It seems so out of the blue and unexpected. Might Rhaegar be behind it? Okay, so, as I say, I don't see a need for this. But let's entertain this for a moment, because this was surprising for everyone. This was not a thing which you would expect someone to do. The extent to which people were then trying to come up with reasons why. He had an Essozi wife, Lord Darklyn of Duskendale, and people then said, well, she must have ensorcelled him. This must be what happened, because, this is a crazy thing to do. Just randomly kidnapping the king and thinking that there's some way out of this. Yes, you might think that you've been handed a poor lot in life, but with port fees and things, but is the way out of it to be kidnapping king? I don't know. But no, is the short answer. No, that's not the sensible way out. So that does seem a little bit odd. However, he doesn't at any point seem that we don't get any hints that he personally is in league with Tywin or anyone else. We don't get afterwards when he gets killed, we don't hear of him shouting out, I was put up to this by Tywin Lannister, or anything along those lines. So there's no hints at it. But could this have been something that's Tywin sort of influenced behind the scenes, suggesting it? He's clever enough to be using reverse psychology, knowing that if he says to Aerys, under no circumstances are you should to be going to Duskendale, that Aerys would go to Duskendale. So he's clever enough to do that bit. And he's also ruthless enough to be deciding to put Rhaegar on the throne. We know that Rhaegar was thinking about perhaps he should be the king. And perhaps the quid pro quo of that is that then we would get Cersei and Rhaegar would marry. It's possible. There's nothing we have that says this did not happen. This was not a conspiracy. But at the same time, we haven't got anything to say that it is a conspiracy. It works just as well with Tywin just making the best use of what circumstances there are to be pursuing and pushing his own agenda. And Maura Lee's asking how much the Defiance of Duskendale contributed to the king's madness and obsession with Dragonfire and then later Wildfire. Well, a huge amount, but it's an accelerant more than anything else. He was already kind of obsessed with fire. There's, I think, a reasonably strong argument to be made that Summerhall will be very much in his mind. this would have been a hugely traumatic time. The birth of his firstborn son at the same time that he's seen his family being burnt to death. That was hugely traumatic. So this concept of fire will have been there. Targaryens always have an obsession with fire. It's not that Duskendale suddenly flipped a switch. It just accelerated what was already there, is my take. Let's go to a question from Dominic Vaughan saying, "Hi Robert, hope you're well, and Dan too. Do you think Rhaegar ever seriously considered replacing his father? The conversation he and Jaime have about best not to discuss roads not taken. Rhaegar seems a weird mixture of a man of action and indecision, or a slavish adherence to prophecy. Just wonder if his moral compass would have ever irked him enough to feel the need to remove Aerys, as Aerys suspected, or was it only when rebellion was in full swing?" So my take is that yes, Rhaegar did get to the point where he wanted to replace his father. I think we've got enough evidence that makes it clear that he did bankroll the tourney at Harrenhal with the thinking that he could be talking to these lords behind the scenes and try and win them round to his idea that we should do something about Aerys. He deliberately set this up in a place outside of King's Landing, knowing that his father Aerys did not leave King's Landing, and also set it up in Harrenhal, which, as well as being central and a good location, will have made people's minds go back in the history books to the first great council they had, the great council that decided who was going to be succeeding King Jaehaerys I. That great council was held in Harrenhal. So people's minds connect this idea of a great council with Harrenhal already. He won, and there's more than a hint that maybe he won the tourney because some people perhaps threw it, that he would then appear to be this great and puissant knight who everybody could fall in behind. He, I think at that point, would have, if not launched a coup, then launched, if that had gone to plan, got everybody together to come up with a plan to how to depose Aerys. But that's obviously a little way along the line. I think that what we read at in Duskendale is interesting, because we read that the line that Tywin pointed at Rhaegar and said, we've got a perfectly good replacement here if Aerys does die. And what we hear is that the reaction of the noble lords, we don't hear any reaction from Rhaegar, because what Rhaegar should have done at that point, if he's being a loyal subject and son, is to say, no, we have to save my father. Of course, I will step in if he does die, but let's try our very best not to. And we don't read that at all. He seems to, through his silence, as far as we can tell, he seems to be tacitly supporting what Tywin was suggesting. So it feels as if there was this build up for Rhaegar, where he gets to the point where he feels, okay, I have to do something. And that conversation you say with Jaime when he's talking about roads not traveled, yes, I think he's hinting there that he was going to be doing something, but now he's going to be fighting in the Battle of the Trident. He's 100% convinced he's going to survive the Battle of the Trident. And the other thing he says to Jaime is, there's going to be some big changes when I come back. The clear implication is that, okay, that whole issue, the plan with Harrenhal didn't work, but we'll deal with this rebellion, and then things aren't going to stay the same as they were before. Basically, he is hinting, I think, that that he was going to be trying to replace his father when they win. Paul Taylor saying, "Hi Robert, when do you think Bloodraven first knew that Aerys II was a wrong lad?" Well, I think Bloodraven will have been very aware of him, and what he was like, probably from quite early on. But my general take is that Bloodraven was focused by this point on Rhaegar, not on Aerys. Aerys was just a means to an end. Aerys was the way to get to Rhaegar. He wanted Rhaegar then to be marrying somebody with first men blood, a Stark, and that was where he was wanting to go. So I think actually he didn't care. He only cared that Aerys survived long enough for Rhaegar to be doing what he needed to be doing. Reflective Rambling, picking up a question for Luna Cascade. Thank you so much. I hugely appreciate it when people do that. Saying there is a popular theory in the fandom that Bran or Bloodraven increased Aerys's paranoia. Any thoughts? Yeah, I've got a question coming up. Where is it coming up soon? So I will answer this in more depth later on about the specifics, but I will answer sort of the broad thing here. This theory has got many different angles to it, but basically the theory goes that Bloodraven or Bran sort of were somehow whispering to the Mad King, and this communication, perhaps they were communicating. The most popular bit of this theory is that Aerys is going, burn them all, because he's been given a vision of the White Walkers, the army of the dead, and that is what the instruction is. This is what the Targaryen king who's ruling should be doing. He should be burning all of these people, but the message doesn't come through very well. It does not affect him very well, and he just garbles it. And so that's the theory. Is there any truth to that? I mean, I don't think we can argue against it, but I don't think we need that in order for our understanding to work, if that makes sense. So can we see a roadmap for Aerys getting to being paranoid and obsessed with fire without having somebody invading his dreams? Yes, I think we can. So it's possible that happened, but I don't think we can say it definitely happened. So sort of connected with this, Tazta says, "Hello, Robert. I hope you're well. Do you believe Aerys may have been a dragon dreamer? Did he dream something about burning them all and go mad?" And Magma Frost says similarly, "Hi, Robert. Over the past few streams, I've come to suspect that Aerys II may have received dragon dreams, which were symbolic of his daughter's dragons hatching." That's Dany's dragons. And this led to his attempted burning of King's Landing. Something along the lines of a great fire burning the body of a king, and a dragon emerges from the ashes. I think similar imagery from Dragon Dream may have also led to Summerhall too. In all three cases, we have a great fire, the body of a king burning, and an expectation that dragons would emerge. We know that Summerhall and Drogo's funeral were both informed by dragon dreams. It seems to fit too well for it not to be the case that Aerys II's attempted burning of King's Landing was similarly informed by dragon dreams. Perhaps Aerion Brightflame's death fits this same pattern as well, albeit more symbolically. Drinking wildfire. So I did a video on this a few weeks ago, actually. This is one of the ones I do jointly with History of Westeros. And so if you want the sort of the longer answer, do go and check out that video. I think I called it something like the Mad King's Plan, Secret Plan, something along those lines. So might he have had dragon dreams? I'm absolutely convinced he did. Personally, I think that is exactly what seems to have been going on here. Which also, incidentally, makes you go, I don't think this might be Bran or Bloodraven, because he's already got the dragon dreams coming to him. Why do I think he might have dragon dreams? Well, firstly, because loads of Targaryens did. We thought, before we got to House of the Dragon, I think the idea of dragon dreams was there were a few Targaryens who got dragon dreams. Now I think we're increasingly coming to the view that dragon dreams, lots of Targaryens do, and particularly these later Targaryens. As we've been going through the later Targaryens, I've been struck by how many have dragon dreams of some kind. How many are obsessed with trying to hatch dragon eggs in some way. Maester Aemon talks about he had 3 brothers, all of whom had dragon dreams, and those dreams killed all of them. It would be, I think, a shock if Aerys II wasn't having some kind of dragon dreams. Now, the burn them all. I'll cover this now because I think this is worth pointing out, that the phrase "burn them all" is very much a show thing. That isn't the words that are used. There's not the words that are used in A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm just trying to see whether I can find the. So yeah, this is what Jaime remembers. Let him be king over charred bones and cooked meat. Let him be the king of ashes. So that's the wording. Let's. So I'm just trying to have. Sorry, apologies for this. I was just trying to find the longer version of this. I can't find it. Apologies. But anyway, so this burn them all idea. It's what we remember and from the TV show, burn them all. I think I understand why they went down this route, as just this is the thing that he says, but I think it slightly gives the wrong impression, because yes, he was planning on burning down King's Landing, but this wasn't because he wanted to burn the people in King's Landing. That's almost like their collateral damage. That's not really what he's thinking. And Jaime reflects. He says he doesn't think that Aerys actually. He wanted a funeral pyre, the biggest funeral pyre ever, but he did not think that Aerys actually thought he would die. He thought that Aerys thought that he would be reborn as a dragon. So why on earth would Aerys think that? And what you so Magna Frost, what you've come up with, I think, is some of the key points here, in that we've got these links between various different things. We've got this concept of a funeral pyre, a king being burned, a dragon emerging from it, dragon eggs. We've got this idea that perhaps could turn into a dragon. These are recurring themes that are going again and again. And it does seem to me as if a lot of these Targaryens, Aerys, Egg probably, Aerion Brightflame, they had similar dreams, seeing something like what happened with Dany. Seeing Khal Drogo's funeral pyre, seeing her walking into the flames and seeing dragons emerging from it. This is, if these Targaryens got a vision of that, but not a clear vision where, oh, that's a female Targaryen, that's not a male Targaryen, so that's clearly not about me. But if they got like a fuzzy vision, if they just got hints, if they just got ideas, this would lead them to what we see here. Egg trying to hatch dragon eggs with fire. This idea, Aerian Brightflame, thinking maybe he can drink wildfire because he would turn into a dragon. Aerys II, thinking that he can create a funeral pyre and then he would turn into a dragon bursting forth from the flames. This all kind of adds up and makes sense. And when you take this as the most likely solution for why he became obsessed with fire, why he wanted to burn down King's Landing, when you start doing that, actually, you start to have to put him on the pile of Targaryens who Aemon would probably look at sadly, as he had dragon dreams and the dragon dreams killed him. That's the same kind of group of Targaryens. That's not to excuse what Aerys did in any way, shape or form, but I think that we can actually now start to understand why he was doing that. The Targaryens, after the dragons had gone, increasingly got these dreams and visions of how do we get the dragons back? And all the different kings seemed they had one after another. This is how we get the dragons back. Daeron the First, I am the dragon. Aegon the Fourth, I'm going to build some kind of steampunk dragons. Baelor the Blessed, I shall pray over these dragon eggs. Aegon, I'm going to try and hatch them by getting in pyromancers from Shai. Then Aerian Brightflame, I think I'm going to drink this wildfire because that might turn me into a dragon. All of these, and there's more, all of these Targaryens were focused in on getting dragons back. And so that is what we see here with Aerys II. At the end, where Jaime can see he's just going to be killing lots of people, but he's almost blinded to it. He doesn't care about all of these other people. He just thinks about the dragon. And it's as if the dragon dreams can just completely dominate the mind of the Targaryens. Daeron the drunkard, he was a drunkard because the dragon dreams happened so much and they were so vivid that the only way that he could cope is by drinking himself basically to an early death. This is how much the dragon dreams can take over a Targaryen. Okay, let's go to Maura Lee asking, what did Aerys know regarding prophecy, the prince that was promised, and the eventual need to unite in order to defeat the threat from the north? Okay, so this is an interesting one because Aerys doesn't, we never see him really focusing, and we're not told that he was focusing in on prophecy, that he was reading old stuff. Rhaegar seems to have developed his own understanding of prophecy independently from his father. He was reading some scrolls, and on the basis of what he read, he decided that he was going to be the prince that was promised. So, would Aerys have been aware of the prince that was promised prophecy? Of course, 100% absolutely aware of it. The only reason why he got married to his sister was because his father was convinced of it. He grew up in this understanding. His father was 100% convinced and obsessed about the prince that was promised prophecy. So Aerys will have been aware. Does he like it? Perhaps not. Perhaps this is why we don't really hear about the Principal's Promise from his perspective. Perhaps he sees this as being, actually, this is a bad thing, which has forced me to marry this woman that I don't really love. So he will have been aware, but almost certainly not as obsessed with it as Rhaegar was. As for the other prophecy, the first prophecy, Aegon's prophecy, the Song of Ice and Fire, the one that in House of the Dragon we see being passed down from generation to generation, will he have been aware of that? Possibly. Now, this is something that we're not clear on still, because clearly the prophecy was handed down from one generation to the next, all the way up to the Dance of the Dragons. But then it seems likely that it stopped because Rhaenyra had it, and she almost certainly won't have been passing this on to her heirs. One after the other died, and she was, when she died, she just had one very young child with her. Almost certainly she didn't have a chance to pass on the prophecy. Did Daemon have it? Could he have possibly passed on the prophecy? Maybe. The thinking amongst a lot of sort of fans who dig into this at the moment is that probably that bit of prophecy got lost around the time of Baelor the Blessed, who he basically ordered book burnings of everything that was sort of prophecy and dragony and stuff like that, at the same time as praying over some dragon eggs. But it's almost as if he was trying to merge the inheritance, the draconic inheritance he had, with his huge faith. But that was probably the point at which that stopped being passed down. Aerys I, after whom, let's not forget, Aerys II will have been named, Aerys I rediscovered a lot of these prophecies, we're told. Now, where does all this lead? Does Aerys II, the Mad King, does he know about that prophecy that the Targaryens have to be ruling over a united Seven Kingdoms? Maybe. He certainly didn't seem to pass that down to Rhaegar, but he may well have been personally aware of it. The one thing that always just makes me pause for thought is whenever the Targaryens actually pay attention to the North proper and the Wall, because what you'll find is that most of them don't. Most of them seem to sort of kind of leave it alone. Now, Aerys doesn't pay much attention to the North, other than we're told that one of his pet projects was this idea of building a second wall to the North, which suddenly makes him seem like one of the few Targaryens who cares about the defenses from the North. He still thinks that the wall is important. The clear implication of that is not that he thinks that the current wall is bad. He thinks that, we can just claim a bit of extra land, but have another wall, because walls clearly are necessary to keep the baddies out. So that always leaves me pause for thought. Is that strong enough evidence to say that he cared passionately about the North and the defense against the others? No, not in the slightest. But it's perhaps indicative. Right, let's go to the chat. See if I've missed much going on here. Aegon Dragonborn saying, what if Aerys saw visions of Dany's dragons hatching alongside Drogon's shadow passing above a burning King's Landing, and he interpreted it as him turning to a dragon and burning the rebels? I certainly think that he saw the first bit about the hatching of dragons. maybe he had a vision of dragons flying over King's Landing as well. That's entirely possible. Andrew K picked up on the rest of the quote actually that I was looking for, saying the Targaryens never bury their dead, they burn them. Aerys meant to have the greatest funeral pyre of them all. Yes, absolutely. So the focus, as I said, when I was talking about the burn them all, the focus is slightly wrong. This is why it doesn't completely ring true as far as A Song of Ice and Fire is concerned. It's because what he's saying is not, I want to burn these people in King's Landing. They're almost like, well, whatever. I'm going to create the greatest funeral pyre of them all. That's the objective. He wants to create a funeral pyre. The fact that this means killing hundreds of thousands of people is actually not really on the top of his mind. Yeah. Callie Summers saying dragon dreams could be like green dreams. You see symbolic visions of people combined with Targaryen hubris, of course. They all think fiery dragon with a crown. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, possibly. I mean, we do see Dany's dragon dreams, which are not. I mean, they're certainly less symbolic than green dreams. It has to be said that they seem to be visions of actual dragons, and Maester Aemon does give us some hints about his dragon dreams, that he could hear the leathern wings, and he could see the dragon flying over a snowy landscape. So that is literally just seeing a vision of dragons. So I don't think that green dreams, which are incredibly symbolic in the way that they present everything, work in the same exact way as the dragon dreams. The dragon dreams do just seem to just give you images. It's just that you might miss the images. So you could see a funeral pyre. You could see a dragon emerging from it, and you might think to yourself, "Oh, I'll just build a really big funeral pyre then." Let's go to a question from Dorothy Techno saying, "G'day, Robert. G'day. Firstly, just wanted to let you know how much I enjoy your content. Thank you so much. My question is around Elia Martell and her children. Aerys essentially kept them hostage to guarantee Dornish troops, as Dorne appeared to be biding their time. Why is that? Is it possible Dorne were waiting for something? Something to do with what was happening at the Tower of Joy and some sort of arrangement or outcome? I have somewhat of a theory, but interested to hear your take." Okay, so yeah, I have a take on this. And this is one of those things where there's two levels. There's the stuff that we know, are pretty clear on, and it stands up on its own. It's sensible, it's boring, but it works. And then we get the slightly more speculative stuff, which is built on some pretty fair assumptions we can make. But first of all, the standard explanation of why were the Dornish holding back, because they were. They had an army ready to go, but they were not immediately marching to King's Landing and saying, "King Aerys, here we are with the army, we're here on your side." Now, Aerys, we know, decided that in order to push them into it, he basically said, "Look, I've got one member of the Martells in my Kingsguard. He's going to be in charge of your troops, but also I'm keeping Elia Martell here basically hostage, and her children as hostage. Do as I say. You bring your army here." So that bit we know, and that worked, and that brought them into the battle. They did go up to the Trident and fought in the Battle of the Trident. Why were they holding back? Well, I think this is the boring but sensible geopolitical answer, is that whereas we often think of this as being Robert's rebellion, this is a rebellion against the Targaryen rule. This won't be how the Martells saw it, because they were Team Rhaegar, 100% Team Rhaegar. The Elia Martell, Doran's sister, had married Rhaegar, and their children would sit on the Iron Throne after Rhaegar. So they were completely on Team Rhaegar. And it's, I think, pretty impossible to imagine that they wouldn't have been aware of Rhaegar's maneuvering, trying to see whether or not he could persuade people to back him if he got his father to abdicate, perhaps have a regency, that kind of thing. So they will have been on Rhaegar's side. They will have been against Aerys, because Aerys hated them. Aerys, he picked up the child of Elia Martell and was like, smells Dornish. That's an insult. He didn't even attend the wedding ceremony of Rhaegar and Elia. That's an insult. He was clearly against Rhaegar. The rumors were he was considering taking Rhaegar out of the line of succession. So are the Dornish going to immediately turn up and say, okay, Aerys, you have control of our troops now? No. They're going to be waiting and seeing what's happening. Whereas Rhaegar has sort of, as far as anyone's concerned, he's disappeared off radar. At some point he will turn, and we're going to be on his side. Rhaegar does reappear. He heads up to take a part in the Battle of the Trident, and the Dornish join up. So that's the simple answer. The slightly more speculative bit of this, but I think based on pretty reasonable assumptions, is that they were in contact with Rhaegar during this time. Why do I think we can say that's based on some pretty fair assumptions? Rhaegar and Lyanna and a couple of members of the Kingsguard and probably a few other people were at the Tower of Joy. Where is the Tower of Joy? The Tower of Joy is a watchtower on the Prince's Pass. The Prince's Pass is the main thoroughfare into Dorne. There's only two real overland ways into Dorne. You get the Bone Way, which is like climbing over a mountain, and it's quite hard work. And then you get the Prince's Pass, which is much wider, and that's where most people head in. Now, the Prince's Pass has some families. The Fowlers are probably the most famous families within Dorne, whose job it is, passed down generation to generation to generation, to keep an eye on the Prince's Pass. They are the guardians of the Prince's Pass. They are there to see who comes in, who goes out. This is a time of war. They will have been hyper vigilant about who's coming in, what's happening, where's what kind of people coming in and out. I would find it astonishing if Dorne was unaware of the fact that the heir to the throne, plus the most sought-after woman in all of Westeros, Lyanna Stark, plus two members of the Kingsguard, headed down the Prince's Pass and then set up in a watchtower, one of their watchtowers, just by the Prince's Pass, were there for months. It would be astonishing if the Martells did not know. Now, there was a Dornish presence there. The House Dane were clearly central to everything that was going on here. Arthur Dane was the closest confidant of Rhaegar, and he was there at the Tower of Joy. His sister had been handmaiden to Elia Martell. So the Dornish will have been aware, almost certainly aware, that Rhaegar was there. And when I say they were probably in conversation with him, Rhaegar seems to have been, and you can go back to my videos from ages ago. I will redo them at some point. My videos from ages ago, the Robert's Rebellion playlist, and you can go through all of the background and hints towards this. But Rhaegar was very much driven by prophecy, and he had decided that he needed to have a third child, and he decided he wanted to have that with Lyanna. Now, everybody north of Dawn in Westeros was up in arms about this idea that he might sort of run off with Lyanna. He's got a wife already. The Dornish, incredibly socially liberal. They don't care. They have paramours. They have lots of complicated relationships. They actually would not consider it an insult if Rhaegar did take on another lover. So the immediate problem you might face, thinking, oh well, surely they'd hate Rhaegar for cheating on Elia. That's not how they would see it in the slightest. But let's say Lyanna might have an issue with this. She doesn't want to be just the piece on the side. She wants to get married. So what we're then left with is an actual complicated political situation, because if Rhaegar has decided Lyanna's the one, and Lyanna wants to get married, he's already married. The Dornish, the Martells, will have to be brought into this, because he will have to enter into a negotiation. If he got a divorce from Elia in some way and married Lyanna, he would have to, the Dornish would care that the children from that marriage were still in the line of succession. So if we fit all those bits together, what we get is probably Rhaegar and Lyanna down at the Tower of Joy. Rhaegar's in conversation with the Martells about what's actually happening. What's the plan? He's wanting to he's wanting to sort of divorce Elia, perhaps. We don't know that bit for certain, but certainly the Dornish will want to make sure that Elia's children remain, whatever happens with Rhaegar and Lyanna, the children over there remain in the line of succession. They're having these long, complicated discussions. Rhaegar is holding back. He doesn't want to be supporting his father straight away, but eventually he basically gets ordered back. And so he has to decide, what am I doing? And he says, and the thought has to be, this rebellion is not just a little thing that's going to go away. This is them trying to get rid of Targaryen power completely. So that the rebellion has to be shut down. So at some point he would then say, okay, then Martells, let's just go. We'll defeat Robert Baratheon in this big battle, and then we'll go ahead with doing the plan. So that's the, as I say, that's the slightly speculative but based on reasonable assumptions bit. The baseline is that the Dornish were just holding back because they didn't like Aerys and they didn't know whether they wanted to be supporting him in the war. Okay. Reflective Rambling picking up a question for Richard Smith. Thank you very much. Saying, why did the throne cut Aerys so much? It cuts the unworthy theory, stick to the prophecy theory, or was Aerys just fidgety? Yeah, I think I did a video on the why does the Iron Throne cut people, or does it cut unworthy people? Why did it cut him so much? I mean, I think the last suggestion you have, that he was just fidgety, is probably a fair one. He did get cut quite a lot. Now, if you take this idea that the Iron Throne judges the kings and cuts the kings who are the bad kings, then this does, I guess, all make sense. But what counts as a bad king? My theory, I mean, it's a theory. I don't know. It's a bit slightly more speculative than I normally go. But what I think I said in the video when I made it a while ago was that, what if this is not judging king based on whether they are good, but based on whether they are sticking to the role the Targaryens should have in uniting the Seven Kingdoms and keeping the Targaryens on the thrones so that the Targaryens can then lead the defense against the others in time. If you interpret it that way, actually you can go back through all of the Targaryens who were cut by the Iron Throne, and you can see the timing of that happening is coincidental to the point at which they are doing something which threatens that. So Maegor is the most obvious and drastic example. He was killed by the Iron Throne. If you take this approach. And why? Because at that point, he actually had alienated the entire Seven Kingdoms against him. He was not just like being a bad person. Everybody had turned against him and Targaryen rule, and you needed a new king coming in. You will find that Rhaenyra got cut by the Iron Throne. The time that we're told that she got cut by the Iron Throne happens immediately after she rejects a peace offer from Alicent. She takes King's Landing. Alicent's there. Alicent basically says, why don't we try and come up with some kind of peace deal? And Rhaenyra says no, and goes and sits on the Iron Throne, and then she gets cut. So if you go through that line of logic, then you get to this idea. So what's Aerys doing here? He is threatening the entire chance of Targaryens ruling because he is turning the entire nation against him. So, as I say, it's slightly more speculative. It's the Iron Throne cutting a bad king is the kind of thing that is used in world as a way to justify your own view of particular kings. So I generally tend to the less supernatural answer on this one, but I like it. Richard Smith saying good kings are probably just more composed. Yeah, I mean, yes. Let's go, and bad kings flail about the place with their torturing and raving. Yes, completely. Let's go to a question from, a couple of questions on, this was what I was going to talk about, and there was a question a little bit earlier about the burn them all. So maybe I've already covered this, but let's see. Maura saying many fans have speculated that either Bloodraven and or Bran contributed to the king wanted to burn them all. What do you think? And Michelle Raimu saying, hello, Robert. I hope all is well. My question pertains to Aerys' madness. There are many instances in his life that contributed to his madness. But are we missing Bloodraven in all this? My own personal theory is that Bloodraven was trying to contact Aerys from the wall via a form of dragon dreams, which lead to Aerys constantly yelling, burn them all. Maybe Bloodraven was trying to herald the return of the dragons and the prophecy that he and the first King Aerys were studying. What do you think about Aerys' madness? So, yeah, I will pick up a little bit more on this here. The burn them all thing is a show thing. So I think I even did a video way back in the day, which was sort of looking at this, and I kind of liked the theory then in the show world that Bloodraven perhaps was trying to show Aerys that they're coming, you're the king, and the others are coming, the White Walkers are coming, and this is what you have to do in order to defeat them. You need to use fire. And so, but this message was so overwhelming that the Mad King then just like all he got was burn them all, and he translated that in his mind to I'm going to burn everybody here. So I thought that idea actually worked really well for the show. They didn't really develop any of that side of it, so we never saw, but it was a good and fun theory there. In the books, as we're reading, it's not quite that straightforward, and burn them all is a slight twist and emphasis on what we've got that Aerys was saying. Might Bloodraven have been trying to contact him? Possibly. And I always will default to trying to blame Bloodraven, but I genuinely think he was focusing much more on Rhaegar at this point in time. I think he cared a lot less about what was happening with Aerys. He didn't think that Aerys would be king for much longer. What he cared about was the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and what he wanted was for that child to come up to the wall. And what better way than to do that, as it happens, than for Ned to bring him up to Winterfell. So that's where I see his attention at that moment in time. I don't see a need for additional dreams to be pushed in there than we've already got. At which point, I just want to do my normal few thank yous. Patrons, thank you. I can't do what I do without you, so I'm hugely grateful for your support. Thank you very much. If you would like to support this channel, there's a link down in the description to Patreon. That's the best way to do it. And also moderators, if you're watching this live, if you're in the chat, if you're enjoying the chat, the people keeping this not just a safe place for everyone, but also somewhere where the conversation can just go, and there's some fantastic conversations and questions going on in the chat. That the people responsible for that are the moderators, who are amazing. So if you are there in the chat, could you just give a little bit of love to the moderators? Thank you. Right, so let's go to Johnny Targs saying, my wife and I are expecting our second child in a few weeks, and your content got me through a great deal of midnight feedings for my first, so I'm looking forward to revisiting a good deal of your content for the second child. Well, all the very best for that in a few weeks' time. May it be a blessed time for you both. My question today is, when it is all said and done, after the winds of winter and a dream of spring, do you think Cersei or Dany will parallel the Mad King more? There is a lot of foreshadowing for Cersei. I'm currently in a reread, Valar Rereadus of A Feast for Crows, but maybe Dany will burn King's Landing in the end. What are your thoughts? Yeah, so Dany is obviously Aerys II's daughter. So we would expect to see something of him in her, but it is undeniably the case, as you've been describing, that Cersei comes across as more like Aerys II, more like the Mad King. There's one chapter in particular that maybe you've just read, but it is this is from Jaime's perspective, and you get after Tywin gets killed by Tyrion in the Tower of the Hand, Cersei then becomes obsessed with this idea that there are these passageways running throughout the Red Keep that she doesn't know where they are. Varys has also disappeared, so maybe he's got some other assassins just hanging around there. And she's trying to find all of these in the Tower of the Hand, and eventually decides, actually, I'll just get rid of it. And she gets the pyromancers to come, put in wildfire, and she holds this like little party for it, and then boom, the Tower of the Hand burns down. And we see this, as I say, from Jaime's POV, and he looks at her, and the way that she is looking at the wildfire as it's looking up the Tower of the Hand, he says that reminded him of Aerys II. That reminded him of the Mad King, the way that she loved that wildfire. So she is the one at the moment who is showing a whole lot more of the echo of the Mad King. And I think that it probably won't happen exactly as it happened on the show, but there's certainly a fair to middling chance that Cersei will get her revenge on all the people that she wants her revenge on, the High Sparrow and the Faith and the Tyrells, who are going to be blamed for Kevin Lannister's death. If she can blow them up, perhaps blowing up the Great Sept with wildfire, then I think that fits exactly. The burning of the Tower of the Hand feels like foreshadowing, not the main event itself. This is her seeing what wildfire can do and then becoming obsessed with it and thinking, well, this is something I can use elsewhere. So I think of the two, Cersei seems to be going down that route a lot more. She's also got a lot of echoes, I think, coming up of Rhaenyra and her 6 months reigning in King's Landing. Dany, as it stands with Dany, she is she starts out with a lot of noble intentions, but it's very clear that where she's heading, and I'm not making this up, this is what George R. R. Martin has said, is that she's going down a darker path, at least in the next book. Now, what does that mean? More fire and blood, definitely. She's definitely going to be in sort of in Essos, probably for most, if not all, of the next book. First of all, dealing with the Dothraki, then coming across with her army and navy to try and launch her invasion of Westeros. So she will, along the way, come up against a whole load of opponents, and she will increasingly, I suspect, be using her dragons to be taking those opponents down. Now, that echo is more of Aegon the Conqueror than it is of Aerys II, it has to be said. So if I were to say at the moment, this could all shift in the Winds of Winter. At the moment, Cersei is having the more echoes of the Mad King than Dany, who is looking like she will get echoes of Aegon the Conqueror. Question from Caius Ballerina saying, what's up with Aerys hating Elia so much when he arranged the marriage? Also, Tywin totally paid off Steffon Baratheon, so he'd fail in Essos, right? Oh, two really good questions. I'll happily get into both of these. The Steffon Baratheon thing, this is fascinating because what happens, this is towards the end, not right in the last few years, but when the relationship between Tywin and Aerys is really quite strained. Aerys summons his other childhood friend, Steffon Baratheon, into court. And the clear implication is that he's being lined up to be the Hand of the King. But we have Aerys has a task for Steffon Baratheon first, which is he needs to get a wife for Rhaegar. He's accepted the fact Rhaegar needs a wife. We wish to carry on the Targaryen rule, then we need the next generation. And what probably he had initially been hoping for was that he would have a daughter of roughly comparable age to Rhaegar, and then they could marry. Probably. He didn't have the greatest experience of that in his own life, but certainly he will have seen for his parents that worked very well. So probably that was a thought. But as we've noted, there was this long gap where they didn't have any children. Rhaella didn't have any children that survived. It's really quite tragic. So Aerys says, I need to get a bride for Rhaegar. And he sends Steffon Baratheon, who at this point is one of the few people he probably trusts, over to Volantis on this mission to find a noble-born woman of Valyrian stock, of Valyrian sort of ethnicity, who can come back and marry Rhaegar. Stefan goes off and returns and saying, I couldn't find anyone. That bit of the story gets completely blown away, though, by the fact that Stefan Baratheon, within sight of his home at Storm's End, he and everyone on board his ship gets drowned. The ship crashes, basically. It gets caught in a storm. And so he dies. This is the storm that Patchface, incidentally, just about survives at the other end. So that's what was going on. But this is odd. The going over to Volantis and finding no one is odd, because they're everywhere in Volantis. If you go to the old city in Volantis, they're obsessed by the fact that they are the blood of old Valyria. This is the thing that they're always talking about. There are lots of people there. There's no way that Stefan Baratheon would not be able to find anyone. Even if he couldn't, he could have then gone on to somewhere like Lys and found someone there. Tyrosh, perhaps. He would have been able to find someone, but he returned with no one. This is suspicious. And yes, it does seem reasonably likely. It was Tywin at the time was wanting Cersei to be marrying Rhaegar. So given the fact that we knew that Stefan Baratheon and Tywin were friends, then it all adds up to yes. It seems likely that Tywin and Stefan had some sort of agreement that they wouldn't, that Stefan wouldn't find anybody. So that was what's going on there. What's up with Aerys hating Elia so much when he arranged the marriage? Well, so when that didn't work, we did finally have to get somebody for him to marry. And the question is, who? Now, obviously there was Cersei, but there was no way on this planet that Aerys was going to allow Rhaegar to marry Cersei. So there were some other kind of potentially eligible women out there, but Elia Martell was not somebody who was from a family that could potentially be plotting against him, which is quite a sort of a roundabout way of talking about the South, which we will in a little bit, the South Ron conspiracy, which is the fact that in the background, while all of this was going on, we focus in on the dynamic between Aerys and Tywin and Rhaegar, but at the same time, the top noble families in the Seven Kingdoms were starting to arrange themselves into a block. This is the Starks and the Tullys and the Arryns and the Baratheons and potentially even the Lannisters through a series of marriages. Now, this, first of all, we know we've got Brandon Stark was going to be marrying Catelyn Tully, linking the two families from the Starks and the Tullys, so the Riverlands and the North. Then we had Lyanna Stark was going to be engaged to Robert Baratheon. That was the plan. So the Baratheons were brought into this. Ned Stark was fostered by Robert Arryn, so the Arryns were brought into this. We don't know whether this was a bigger part of the plan as well, but the negotiations were going to happen quite soon for Lysa Tully, who we know as Lysa Arryn, to be marrying Jaime Lannister. So suddenly all of these northern houses were starting to be joining up with each other. And that's the kind of thing that Varys will have been very aware of. So who are you going to marry Rhaegar to, not one of these suspect houses over there, the Martells. So she's the sensible political choice. However, that doesn't mean that he likes it. He doesn't like it at all. And soon he realizes that actually what he's created is another faction within court against him, because that brings the Martells in on Team Targaryen, but Team Targaryen is now being split between Team Aerys and Team Rhaegar. So I hope that kind of makes sense. It's the geopolitically sensible match, but that doesn't mean that he likes it even slightly. Let's go to Martin S. Hi there, Martin, saying, does the Mad King's obsession with fire have any supernatural component related to Targaryens being heat resistant? Could it be inspiring him like fire is my element, as it were? Well, yes, I think this is true. I think it's true for a lot of Targaryens. The Targaryens do like heat, and they like fire. On a very basic level, Dany was fond of very hot baths. So it's not just that Targaryens are heat resistant or have a degree of heat resistance. It's just they actively like it, and they like looking at flames. They enjoy fire things. They burn their dead. So fire is not. It's not just about dragons. Fire is a natural and instinctive thing for them. So yes, I think I would agree that this is at a sort of a very basic level. Targaryens like fire. John Patlzik saying, thank you for the content you provide. I have listened to your content during the most difficult time of my life. Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot. When people tell me things like that, I'm just literally just sitting here in my front room talking to my computer, and it feels, don't always know who's there and listening, and obviously have no idea what people are going on, what's going on in people's lives. So if I have played some small part in helping support you through a difficult time, then that makes me incredibly honored, to be honest. But you have my blessing. I hope that from now on, it's your path is straight and true, and good times, I'm sure, are ahead. So yeah, every blessing to you. Martin S. Saying, when A Song of Ice and Fire has any expression like Valar something, for instance, Valar Morghulis, is that a Tolkien reference, as in the Valar? After all, George R. Martin does like Tolkien's Legendarium a lot. Whether it's a deliberate Tolkien reference or not, I don't think he's ever said that. But he is a massive Tolkien fan. There's no doubt about that. He reads The Lord of the Rings, if he can, every year. I dare you to find any extensive interview with George R. R. Martin where he doesn't mention Tolkien or The Lord of the Rings. That's the thing he talks about the most. He's absolutely obsessed with it. So he will know about the Valar, clearly, and the idea that he took that as a kind of an inspiration for that is entirely possible. There are definitely a whole load of things that, as somebody who is nerdy about both of those different worlds, I look at and go, that seems very much like it's an honoring Tyrion, for example. Those who are not Lord of the Rings fans, Tyrion is City of the Elves. Is also my favorite one. It's technically pronounced Arthedain, but there's one of the kingdoms of the north in Middle Earth. It's written Arthedain, which always makes me think George R. R. Martin must have read that once as Arthedain. That's a good name. I'll use that. Jacques Cousteau, thank you so much. I think that's a super sticker there. Thank you. I hugely appreciate it. I think that's your first super as well. So Jacques-Yves Cousteau, I should say. So thank you very much for that. And is that me caught up on the chat? I think that is. Yeah. So let's go to. Zach K. Some people saying some lovely things in the chat. Actually, Zach K. saying your content has also helped me this year, which has been the hardest in my life. It gives a nice escape. Well, thank you. I feel very touched by that. Thank you. Johnny Togs. That's the one I've just done. Magma Frost saying. Hi again, Robert. I'd be interested to hear you talk about Aerys II from the perspective that he was the first king in several generations to have been born and raised as the heir. Do you think this played a significant part in his personality? I noticed it's not a circumstance he shared with the other truly Targaryen kings. Okay, this is, I think, fascinating. Because this is one thing that I've noticed as we've gone through this series is quite how many of the Targaryen kings did not grow up thinking they would be king. We get some obvious examples. You get Aegon V, Aegon the Unlikely. He didn't think he would ever be king. He was the fourth son of a fourth son. But when you go through the list, you find again and again and again quite how many of these Targaryen kings did not expect when they were growing up that they were going to be king. And what I mean by that is there are 17 official, if you take the official list of Targaryen rulers, there are 17. Only 3 grew up knowing that they were going to be king, which is an astonishingly small amount when you think about it. We're talking, I don't even know what that is in sort of percentages, about 20-odd%, something like that. It's really small. Most Targaryen kings, by a long way, did not think they were going to be king when they were born. It's just going through Aegon I, Aegon the Conqueror, he didn't, because this was before the conquest. He grew up thinking he would be Lord of Dragonstone. His son Aenys did grow up thinking he was going to be king. Maegor didn't. Maegor was second in line. He was succeeded by Jaehaerys. Jaehaerys didn't think that he was going to be king. Viserys became king after a great council. He never thought he was going to be king. Aegon II grew up. We know that Rhaenyra was the named heir. So Aegon II, as much as he and his family might have thought he should be king next, he did not grow up thinking that he definitely would be king. Aegon III didn't grow up thinking he was going to be king. He had 3 elder half-brothers who were ahead of the line as far as he was concerned. Daeron I, he did grow up thinking he would be king, but Baelor, his brother, definitely didn't. And then Viserys, it went back up to Viserys II. He didn't grow up thinking that he was going to be king. Aegon IV, and then Daeron II, they again know. You can then move on to Aenys. He didn't think he was going to be there. Baelor Breakspear was going to be king. Aenys didn't think he was going to be king. Maekar didn't think he was going to be king. We've already talked about Aegon V. Jaehaerys II, who took over from Aegon, he didn't think he was going to be king because he had an elder brother, Duncan Targaryen. Then after Jaehaerys, we get Aerys, who did grow up thinking he was going to be king. So this is rare. I think there were only 3, maybe I miscounted as I was going through, but I think there's only 3 Targaryens who grew up thinking they were going to be king. And you look at them and you don't think I don't think on that sample size we can actually say that in and of itself proves anything. But the fact that he thought he was going to be king undoubtedly will have impacted on him. I don't think there's any way you can get around that. The difference, just compare, say, Egg's upbringing as a child, when he was seeing what the Seven Kingdoms was like, he cared about the small folk. That clearly impacted on him as a king. He introduced legislation that improved the rights of the small folk. Aerys II didn't have that. He grew up being able to have anything he wanted, because he knew he was going to be king. And it's not as if there was even any. This was down to just one line of Targaryens left now. It's not as if there were other sort of random cousins hidden away somewhere who might be trying to challenge him for the throne. No, this was it. And this was not just the line of he was in the line of succession, but also his father will have told him again and again, you're also from your line, this is the prince that was promised. So you're also a line of prophecy, as well as a line as being Targaryens, which were better, and Valyrians better than everyone else, different from everyone else, and you're the line of kings. So he will have grown up in the most privileged 1%, 0.0001% of the population, and that has to have had an impact on him. Callie Summers saying, if dragon dreams like green dreams are symbolic, Targs may see themselves as crowned dragons. Could that explain Aerys, Arian, etc.? Would Robert or Stannis see them as warnings if they got the dreams? Yeah, so I don't think I talked a little bit earlier in the stream about dragon dreams, and the things that we have seen, the descriptions of them tend to be less symbolic than green dreams. Green dreams do seem to be more. I see a wolf. A winged wolf held down by stone chains. This is symbolic. A three-eyed crow. This is symbolic. That kind of thing. Whereas Dany has dragon dreams of literally her on the back of a dragon flying. We get a few in Dunk and Egg. We get a few examples where Diren the Dreamer. He has literally seen Dunk. He's seen him in his dreams. He said, "I've seen you. I know you." There is a slightly symbolic, him lying with basically killing a dragon, and that's obviously, this is Targaryen-y rather than an actual literal dragon. And then John the Fiddler, who is Daemon II Blackfire, he also literally sees Dunk wearing a white cloak, which is him seeing the future of him being a member of the Kingsguard. So they seem a lot more literal, dragon dreams do, than green dreams, it has to be said. So might Targaryens see themselves as crowned dragons? I mean, that would certainly fit if you're going down the sort of more symbolic route. Jacques-Yves Cousteau is saying, I sent a statement with a super chat if you want to respond to that. Yeah, very happy to. If I can just having a quick flick back, see whether I can find it. Saying the egos of Tywin and Aerys brought instability to the realm. Yeah, I would agree with that. They're very different types of egos, though. But it was the clash of those two. When you're reading the section in The World of Ice and Fire about the reign of Aerys, it's almost as much about Tywin as it is about Aerys. Now, part of that is because George R. R. Martin is so committed to his sort of in-world conceit that this is written by the Maesters, and one of the key contributors to that is Grand Maester Pycelle, who is a Tywin fanboy. But partly you have to say this is the key relationship in Aerys's life was not with his wife so much, because there was no love there. It was with Tywin, and as that frayed, then that caused all the problems. Let's go to I think I've got another one. Zach K, thank you very much for that kind comment. Martin S asking, when did the Lannisters become a top-tier house to the extent it is in Game of Thrones and the decades before? In House of the Dragon, the Lannisters do seem powerful, but less so than the House Hightower and House Velaryon. Yeah, so a very brief history. They were always, so they were kings of the rocks. They were always a powerful house back in the day. And basically the Westerlands were theirs. When the conquest happened, the Targaryens are the most powerful house. Under them, there were the next three most powerful houses. House Velaryon, because they're so closely linked to the Targaryens, and they've got huge amounts of sea power. And after Corlys Velaryon did his trips, they also briefly became the richest family in the Seven Kingdoms. House Baratheon, because they also had this very strong link in with the Targaryens, and they had an indomitable castle. And House Hightower, because House Hightower, hugely ancient house, hugely rich, and also they bankroll both the Maesters and the Faith of the Seven, based at Old Town. So those were the three top ones, and then underneath that you get the other main houses, including House Lannister, who were always rich because of the gold. However, under Tywin's father, they got weaker and weaker. And so they were sort of slipping down the sort of the league table. However, once Tywin himself took over, he'd dealt with the Rains and the Tarbecks. He then was, as Hand of the King, gained personal great power, but also the gold from Castle Rock was better used and not spent off on frivolous stuff. That's when they gained the high level of power that they had when we get to the story of the Song of Ice and Fire. And a question from AK Channel TV saying, thank you for the stream, Robert. I was listening to The Happy Prince, by the way. Great video. Oh, yeah, really pleased. That's on The Well Told Tale. If you quick plug for this is my other channel. It's my sort of side project, passion project is probably the best way of saying it. The Well Told Tale, it's available as a podcast or on a YouTube channel. I'm sure there are links somewhere down there. It's basically me audio narrating stories, the best fantasy and science fiction stories around. On the podcast, we've started Dracula. So if you're a Dracula fan, or in fact, if you've never even read Dracula, then on the podcast, on the YouTube channel, we're playing catch up a little bit. The Happy Prince, we did that a little bit ago, and we've just started The Trial by Franz Kafka, which is a really interesting story. But thank you. Okay, so Andrew K saying, I'm far from a Tywin proponent, but he seems to be doing a very good job as Hand. The realm was stable. Issues seem to stem more from jealousy and insecurity on Aerys II's end, in my opinion. Yeah, it was definitely more on Aerys' side. And Tywin seems to have put up with a lot more than you might expect, a whole load of provocation from Aerys' side. I think I probably said at the beginning of the stream, whatever else you think about Tywin, he is efficient and effective, and that's what he brought to the role of Hand of the King. And he just sort of ignored the excesses, as far as we can tell, ignored the excesses of Aerys a lot of the time, and just got on with doing the more boring business of running the kingdom. Let's go to Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. Would you say that Aerys raised Rhaegar to be the future king? I.e., did he ever have that thought of continuity of the Targaryen rule, or did it seem to him he'd be the ending point of it?" Yeah, I think there's every reason to believe that Aerys was raising Rhaegar to be his heir and to be carrying on the Targaryen reign and rule, until very near the end when things just started really fraying. But he actively went to try and get a bride for Rhaegar that he thought would be a good bride for him. Then, when that didn't work, he did arrange that. This did come from Aerys to arrange this marriage with the Martells. And yes, he did bring him up, as far as we can tell, to be thinking that he is going to be the next heir. It was only really at the end that it all started going wrong. Brandy 1842 saying, "Hello, Robert. I was wondering when did the whole Southern Ambitions, Southron Ambitions alliance really start? With Aerys or way before? Also, have you done the Game of Thrones studio tour near Belfast? And if yes, is it worth a visit?" Well, just on that last one, I shockingly haven't ever done it. It's not a long flight, and it's not that expensive either. So I really should have done it, and I haven't. So I have been told, though, that it is excellent. So if you happen to be in that part of the world, then yes, do please go and pay it a visit. As for the Southron ambitions, now this is something that we've not had huge amounts of information about, but we've had little hints dotted throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. Mostly, it has to be said by Barbary Dustin, who has a bit of a chip on her shoulder about the whole thing. She doesn't like she was in love with Brandon Stark, and she wanted to marry him, but Brandon had to marry somebody else. His father said he had to marry somebody else. That somebody else was supposed to be Catelyn Tully, and she had a grudge about that. She then got told maybe she was going to be marrying Ned Stark instead, but then that didn't work because there were potentially other plans for Ned. And then the person that she did get married to went down with Ned to the Tower of Joy and did not return. And Ned did not return his bones either, which caused huge upset and insults. So she has a chip on her shoulder particularly against Ned Stark, but also the Starks as a whole. And she talks to Theon about this Southron ambition. She sort of mentions it a bit. This was the big thing, the problem that stopped her leading her happy life that she wanted to lead with Brandon Stark. So what is it? Well, basically, we're told, and this started with a maester who sort of whispered in Rickard Stark's ear, that Rickard Stark being Ned and Brandon's father, and then he had Southron ambitions. And what this definitely seems to be is that the Starks, most of the time, they keep themselves to themselves in the north. They don't come down. Yes, we get a little bit of them in the Dance of the Dragons. They pop down. There are a few other instances where they sort of appear, certainly during Aegon's invasion. But for the most part, the Starks keep themselves to themselves in the north. Rickard Stark changed that. His heir was not going to marry a noble family in the north, but he wanted them to be marrying one of the big lords paramount in the south, or south of the neck, the Tullys. Then also Lyanna was going to be marrying Robert Baratheon, So that would link together the Baratheons and the Tullys and the Starks. We talked about this a little bit more before. We've also got the link in with the Arryns because Ned was fostered there. And we've also got this intriguing link across to the Lannisters, because the Lannisters, Jaime was supposed to be marrying Lysa Tully. So one thing that I would add to this, which I think is a thought experiment. I find this fascinating because this is something I think I may even do a video on this one, because I can go down a rabbit hole on this. This is something Ned said, or just to take a step back very briefly. So as we understand it, the Southerland ambitions started with Ned's father. He seems to have perhaps given this idea by a maester. We don't know much about that. But the Southerland ambitions, as far as we can tell, were about building alliances with other big houses in the south. The question is, to what end? Why are the Starks suddenly doing that? And this is a very early chapter in book 1, when Ned, I think it's from Kat's POV, and Ned is talking to Kat about the fact that Robert Baratheon has Robert Baratheon has basically said, let's get Sansa engaged to Joffrey. That will join our two families together. So, your grandkids will be on the Iron Throne. And Ned's all very kind of suspicious, don't really like this about it. And Kat says something along the lines of, yes, they're young. Ned says, they're too young. And she says, I was very young when I was supposed to be marrying Brandon, your brother. That didn't happen. And we married, and that's great. But, I was there. And then Ned goes, Brandon. Yes, Brandon would know what to do. He always did. It was all meant for Brandon. You, Winterfell, everything. He was born to be a king's hand and a father to queens. I never asked for this cup to pass to me. Now, we have to be upfront and say it's possible Ned's just speaking in a kind of a colloquial way here, where he was born to be a king's hand and a father to queens. Maybe he doesn't tend to use flowery language like that, but maybe. But if we take that at face value, if we just say, okay, well, hang on, so is Ned telling us what the plan was here? If we do that, we're saying Brandon, the idea, the Southron ambitions was that Brandon would be a king's hand and a father to queens. We know that he was going to be engaged to Catelyn Tully. So in order to be a father to queens, his daughter would have to be marrying the king's son. So you then go, okay, so why and who? Well, he's also apparently going to be hand of the king. So this sounds like they've got an idea. They know who the king is, so that the king can then choose Brandon to be his hand of the king, and then they can bring those two families together. Does this mean that Robert's rebellion was not just this off-the-cuff thing? It was not just this, we're reacting to this moment, and okay, let's rebel. Let's put Robert Baratheon on the throne. Could it be that they might actually have been planning to do something like that all along, to be putting somebody on the throne, whether it was Robert Baratheon or whether they were actually part of this big Rhaegar plot? Was the idea that that they would get marriage for Rhaegar to one of theirs, and then that he would appoint Brandon hand of the king? I don't know. It's a rabbit hole we have to go down. And as I say, it's just one throwaway line from Ned, but I think this one is absolutely fascinating. So let me know what you think in the comments there, because it's something I don't think I've seen many people follow this line of logic down very far. The Southerland ambitions, we know it. It's just like, we'll build an alliance. But was it an alliance just for an alliance's sake, or were they actually genuinely trying to get themselves onto the Iron Throne in some way that early on? If so, that is massive, because that shifts Robert's rebellion away from being this is just a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that Aerys II is doing terrible things, and it makes it, this was what we're going to do all along anyway, and this is just we now have a reason to go to war. Terra Incognito says, yes, Stab Alliance consolidating power, had to use it sooner than they thought. Lapu saying Robert was only trying to offer some reward for the North with a betrothal. Cersei Lannister was queen, Jon Arryn was hand, Hoster Tully's daughters married well, the North got multiple dead Starks. Commander Ray saying, I always assumed Ned meant Brandon should be in Ned's place. Yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely what he's thinking, that he shouldn't have been there. This was Brandon, his older brother, should be making these decisions rather than him. That's definitely there. It's whether or not he let something else out. Okay, yes. So Wheezy Squeezebox saying Brandon was never astute enough to be an effective hand of the king. Yeah, it's interesting. And it's also interesting that you get the reaction of Brandon to, and so I'm going down a tinfoil rabbit hole here, so bear with me for just one more random thought. The reaction of Brandon to Lyanna Stark being given or announced the Queen of Love and Beauty, Rhaegar giving her the crown of blue roses. It was a very strong reaction. Nobody else reacted as strongly as him. And is that because suddenly he thought, no, this whole plan we've got worked out Lyanna has to be marrying Robert Baratheon. We cannot have something just getting in the way. This wasn't just a, hey, I'm insulted that you gave this... that you announced my sister as being the Queen of Love and Beauty. That's it. His reaction always seems slightly stronger than you would expect for somebody just sort of defending his sister's virtue. Right. Anyway, let's move on. Feel free to keep on chatting about that in the chat. I will come back to some more thoughts on that a little bit later. Catherine Furseth saying, hi Robert, I was wondering what Aerys' understanding of the whole bloodline to produce a prince that was promised was. Was he interested in prophecy? He was himself a second generation of a brother marrying sister, involuntary in their case, but allowed his son to marry a Martell. What does this tell us about his insight or lack thereof in prophecies? The whole Song of Ice and Fire prediction. Basically, did he know or care? So, I've answered this in different chunks through this live stream, so I'll try and pull this together in terms of, did he know or care about all of these prophecies? He definitely knew about the prince that was promised prophecy. He definitely wanted to get Rhaegar married to someone, well, perhaps he would have wanted him to be marrying his sister, but that never happened. So he then wanted him to be marrying somebody who would be, from his perspective, diluting the bloodline the least possible by getting somebody from old Valyria. So all of that kind of implies that, yes, that's he was trying to go along with it. You can marry Elia Martell seems to have been almost like a last minute anyone but Cersei Lannister kind of thing. That's what that screams to me. In terms of the other sort of prophetic stuff, he doesn't give the impression of being the kind of king or person who is very focused on prophecy. We have a lot of information about him, and he gives the impression of somebody who's affected by dragon dreams, but not somebody who is trying to fulfill a prophecy in particular. So Igreet Weirwood saying Lyanna. Okay, so this is how this could work. Lyanna and Robert have a son. Then Brandon has a daughter with Catelyn, and so the first cousins marry. Think of Tywin and Joanna. Yeah, I mean, I think that's possibly how the plan was. Chaos Ballerina asking, how did Tywin befriend Aerys? Why was he at court? Well, they, I mean, he was a son of the Lord, so he wasn't. And this is what you would do with your sons. You send them out to be getting some life experience. Brandon Stark, we were talking about just a moment ago, he was sent out. He was fostered there. This is where he met Barbary Dustin, incidentally, when he was out being fostered elsewhere. Ned Stark was out fostered elsewhere. This was normal to send your children out, but how they bonded and connected was in the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Tywin was a knight by this point, and the Aerys and also Stefan were squires, and so they fought together, and that was where their bond really got forged. Let's go to a question from Commander Ray saying, hello, Robert. I wanted to ask you your view on Tywin's friendship with Aerys. And while Aerys is being paranoid and spiteful explains his actions, how did Tywin view Aerys in particular in their youth? As even then he was a skilled schemer. Was Tywin working their friendship from early on, and how high were his ambitions during Aerys's reign? Okay, so we don't see this from Tywin's POV, so we can't know for sure. But yes, his ambitions were high, but his first ambitions were to sort out the Lannisters at home. That was the first thing that he needed to do. He was embarrassed by his father and the way that his father ran the house, basically, and the Lannisters were basically being challenged by people like the Rains and the Tarbecks. So that was his first thing, was to get the house sorted and strong again. And then once he'd done that, yes, he could be Hand of the King, and that will bring more strength to his house. I get the feeling that his ambitions rose over his life for his house as he secured each new level. So when he got to be Hand of the King, and he thought, I will just shoot my shot. I know that Rhaegar needs to have a wife. I will try and get Cersei married to him. That would get them into the royal family. That's high, a high level of ambition. Much later, as we know, then his ambition were basically the Lannisters were the royal family. So when we get into Storm of Swords, then he's Hand of the King. His grandson is king. His daughter is Queen Regent. His son is the Master of Coin. His other son is the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Basically, the Lannisters were ruling everything. So his ambition seems to have gone up through this period. Let's go to the Mucker. Very generous super chat. Thank you very much indeed. saying, been a long time viewer, just wanted to say thank you for your amazing content. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. That's very kind. Andrew K and Agree Weirwood pointing out Tywin was a cupbearer in King's Landing as a child. Yep. And let's go to Zakalok saying, my question is linked to the false spring. If Bloodraven is behind it, how did he manage such a powerful spell? Let's not forget that a cataclysmic event caused the seasons to be out of balance. He must have needed a lot of energy or sacrifice to stop such a cold winter for the whole year. Yeah, I did. We talked about this one last time, so I won't go over the same ground too much, but I agree. The year of the full spring seems magical. It seems to be the thing which, because it just fits, basically, that if you want to have a tourney and if you want everybody from the Seven Kingdoms to be able to get there, then it needs not to be winter, because you can't have a tourney in winter because people can't come down from the north. They can't come from the Vale of Arryn. They're not going to be traveling long distances. So if you want the tourney, you need it not to be winter. And the fact that this was a full spring that managed to fool even the maesters does make it sound magical. But as we know, magic requires sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice could it be? Well, I had a rather dark thought the other day that I was casting around to think, do we know of any like big sacrifices that happened at that particular time? No. But then we do, when Bran gets up to Bloodraven's cave, he finds just a whole sea of bones. And that does make me wonder, some of them probably not from that, but did the sacrifice actually take place in Bloodraven's cave? If he is manipulating events, maybe it actually happened there. Question from Commander Ray. While reading A Clash of Kings, in one of Arya's chapters, an old man mentions Aerys in a fond way. This led me to think how he was viewed by the small folk, and how, from their perspective, he was cruel to the 1%, which probably sounds good to the other 99. And Callie Summers also says the remarkable thing about Aerys' reign is how unremarkable most of it was for most people. For a random person in the Reach say he was just an eccentric king. Sure, there were stories about him being reclusive and having long nails, but there were also strange rumors about lords, and aren't Targaryens supposed to be different anyway? So what did most people in Westeros think about Aerys? It's an interesting one. So yeah, the old man that Arya runs into basically says, and you have to remember the context, they're in the middle of this massive civil war, the War of the Five Kings, and things in the Riverlands are really bad, just terrible. So he was thinking, as you would, it was much better in such and such a time. And he thought back to the time of Aerys II. Now, does this mean that most people liked him? I think most people didn't really know or care much about him. I think Ser Jorah's right when he tells Dany that actually what people care about is the change of the seasons and is it a good harvest and things like that. So for most people, most of the time, they don't actually pay much attention. But what you see, certainly in the first part of Aerys' time as king, you had Tywin very competently managing the economy and the realm. And this was also the first extended period of time for a while of no war. We've had the Blackfire rebellions. We had a few other random things going on there. Aerys' reign, no, there wasn't really a war. until the rebellion, obviously at the very end of it. But during that time, it was a time of peace. It was a time of relative prosperity. Tywin was doing things like building new roads, which very popular locally, I'm sure. Why not? They don't really care, as you say. They probably don't care if a random lord they've never heard of got killed by the king. It doesn't really bother them. Karen Bennett saying, has anyone noticed or noted the resemblance between Aerys II and Henri II of France, 1519 to 1559? I have to admit I'm not a huge expert on French history, so I will read out. This is really interesting stuff. I will read this out without particular comment. But if there's anyone else in the chat who's got expertise on this, then please do put something down in there. When Henri was a child, he spent more than 4 years in captivity in Spain as a hostage in exchange for his father. Subsequently, he suffered from depression before dying, aged 40, from wounds sustained in a tourney. One source described Henri's personality as unsympathetic. He exhibited enormous cruelty towards Protestants, some of whom were nobles. His short-lived male successors and his widow also excelled in persecution to the point of massacre, and their actions helped to spark the French War of Religion between Catholics and Protestants and the end of the House of Valois 20 years after Henri's death. So, there are clearly, on the basis of that, some similarities. The spending time in captivity, the unsympathetic personality, and the all of this leading up to the end of their ruling house. So yeah, it's interesting, and I will have a look in the chat in a moment, see if anyone's got anything else to add to that. Jacques-Yves Cousteau, thank you very much, saying law on Targaryens and Children of the Forest connection seems relatively weak. We don't have an explanation for how Bloodraven was suddenly wired in other than his Blackwood roots. Yeah, so the Targaryens, for the most part of their history, were nothing to do with Westeros. It's only at the very end when they came in, so the links between Targaryens and Children of the Forest is minimal, I would say. And as for Bloodraven, yeah, I think you're right. It's his Blackwood roots means that he was a Greenseer, and that was the thing that mattered to them. The fact that he was Targaryen wasn't the reason why he ended up hooked up to the Weirwood network. Callie Summers saying, hi, Robert. I hope you're doing well. I think it's really interesting how Aerys is remembered by various people. For all the talk about his madness and paranoia, we know that a lot of his suspicions were correct and exacerbated by Varys and Pycelle. Aerys was definitely cruel and violent, but he never seemed to actually lose touch with reality. Do we know what Ned thought of Aerys? Not that Ned is an impeccable judge of character, but I don't remember him having any resentment despite how Aerys executed his family. Yeah, so we don't get... I mean, Ned is... he doesn't sort of linger on thinking about Aerys, at least partly, I think, because this is, for him, connected to trauma. This is a really interesting thing when you're looking at Ned, because Ned knows so much of the backstory of this, and we had 12 chapters from him, and he revealed so little, even though we're inside his mind. And the reason why is because he is actually hiding a lot of this stuff from himself. He has these fever dreams. He tries his best not to remember stuff. So he thinks about what happened back then, and by implication, yes, there is a bad impression of Aerys II because this person tortured and killed his brother and father. Of course there is, but we don't get much more there. We get like a little bit more of a reflection on Rhaegar, but not so much on Aerys. I just want to pick up a little bit. So you're talking about the talk of his madness and paranoia. A lot of his suspicions were correct. I would agree with, but that doesn't mean so. It's worth, I think, just pausing on this one for just one moment. A lot of his suspicions were probably correct. Some of them were quite self-fulfilling, though. So was Rhaegar plotting against him? At the end, probably yes. Was Tywin ruthlessly ambitious and actively wanting more power for the Lannisters, perhaps at the expense of the Targaryens? Probably yes. Was what was going on in the tourney at Harrenhal about unseating him as king? Probably yes. A lot of these things he was probably right on, but not everything. So in particular, when it comes to Rhaella, his wife, there's absolutely no evidence at all. He became convinced she was having affairs. There's absolutely no evidence of that at all. And in terms of the, we get lots of instances of him overreacting and just assuming people are against him, like the Night of the Laughing Tree. He was convinced that this was laughing at him. That's the whole point of it. It was all about laughing at him. That is just not true, as far as we can tell. It was very much not to do with him at all. Yes, he got some things he was right about. Some things he was right to be paranoid about. Some things he was very much wrong. 444. Who can be a suspect for Aerys's bastard child? Lannister siblings, and who else? I know that Tyrion is the most popular choice for a secret Targaryen, but what about Cersei and Jaime? What if Aerys wanted to have Jaime close as he knew he was his son? As stated by Jaime, Cersei has some similarities with Aerys II, last but not least being incest. So, twincest, as we sometimes call it. Who could be the Mad King's bastard children? Now, the first thing to say is that he had lots of, to call them lovers is probably the wrong way of saying it. So very probably there are lots of his children running around in King's Landing and elsewhere incognito. So very probably that. In terms of the Lannisters, now I've talked about potential for Tyrion being a Targaryen lots of times, so I won't go back over that. The timing thing, I think, is quite interesting, because people often base their arguments for who might or might not be, it can't be Tyrion because of the timing or something. The fact is that the information we've got is very high level. And although we sometimes think that Joanna Lannister was in King's Landing, then got chucked out and only returned on the one occasion when she was told she had to return, that's not quite right. We're told that she seldom returned to King's Landing after that, which means that she definitely returned a few times. So whereas you might say the timing doesn't work for Jaime and Cersei because she left King's Landing and had them 2 years later, that doesn't necessarily mean that Aerys is in the clear, because perhaps she did return. So that said, between Cersei and Jaime, we don't really get Lannister vibes from at all, it has to be said. Cersei, we do, definitely. She does not seem to be very Lannistery. I did read, I have no idea where from, read or see a theory ages ago that says that they are twins, but perhaps, and there is a clever biological term for this, perhaps they could be twins with two fathers, which is biologically possible. So could that be the case? And they are actually only half brother and half sister, and Jamie is actually born from Tywin, and Cersei is actually from Aerys. So that's possible. The thing is with Cersei is that although we're getting a lot of these echoes of him, Aerys, that doesn't necessarily mean that she is his daughter. It might just be that George R. R. Martin's putting some historical echoes in there for us, which he does across the piece, without in any way hinting that these people are actually related. Let's go to Frederick Ramblings, just saying, while it was a weirwood dream and not a dragon dream, would having Targaryen blood make them more susceptible to weirwood dreams? And I can't let go of loving Tyrion being the only Lannister. Yeah, so the Tyrion being the only Lannister, it does work for me. It really does. The way that Tywin treats him as if he's not really a Lannister. He can't prove that he's not a Lannister. But he is, as he said, he is Tywin writ small. He is, if you look at what he's like, his intelligence, his strategic planning, his way of trying to solve things using his brain and with sort of writing to people and things like that. This is all classic Tywin stuff. And increasingly as the story goes on, he gets darker as well as a character. And the brutality that Tywin is capable of is also very much there. So Tywin does echo in character, Tyrion does echo in character Tywin really quite a lot. And it would be deeply ironic if he is the only one who actually is a true Targaryen, a true Lannister, after nobody wants him to inherit. Right, let's go to I think this is my last question from my patrons, actually. So now's a good time to get any more questions into the chat. I will try and pick up as much, or comments, I'll try and pick up as much as I can. Andrew Case saying, I'm a twin myself. Wondered how many other twins in the chat. Well, if you're a twin, let Andrew know. Warren Blythe saying, ahoy, Robert. Ahoy to you too, sir. Thanks for all your excellent and enjoyable work. Thank you. Wanted to ask, was anyone in the Targaryen bloodline trying to burn themselves to death to bring back dragons before Bloodraven was around? Seems like each king after Bloodraven manifested their madness in a way related to a burning sacrifice, starting with Summerhall. If this is the trend, it might imply Bloodraven was really pushing this idea even after going beyond the wall. So this is an interesting one. So very broadly, the first half of Targaryens up to the Dance of the Dragons, when there were dragons around, we seem to have dragon dreamers. They seem to have this, prophecies about what the Targaryens should be doing. They know the dreamer saying, well, we need to leave Valyria, and Aegon getting his dream, I have to go and invade Westeros. We have Helena on the show and various others with these dreams about what the Targaryens should be doing as a family. When the dragons go, the thing which goes through all of the Targaryens is, we need to get the dragons back. And how this manifests itself is slightly different. But you see it again and again and again, that almost every king tries in their own way to be hatching dragon eggs. Aerys tries. It's just, we go straight past it because there are so many other interesting things to do with Aerys. He tries to hatch dragon eggs. He finds some old ones from Dragonstone and tries to hatch some dragon eggs. Aegon V tried to hatch some dragon eggs. Aegon III tried to hatch some dragon eggs. We get Aegon IV, who tried to build dragons, steampunk dragons. Baelor prayed over dragon eggs to try and make all of them. This is about how do we get the dragons back. Aerion interprets this in a slightly different way. Hey, maybe I can drink this and I can become a dragon. So this is what the focus is. When the dragons are not there, it's almost as if the flip is switched. The switch is flipped even. And we're not focusing so much on this high-level prophecy. We're just, get the dragons back. We need the dragons. When Dany has the dragons, then we can start to have the more high-level, what you're going to be doing with them. So is this Bloodraven pushing this? My take is no, because this started before Bloodraven. The Targaryens were trying to get dragons hatched before Bloodraven was around. They were trying to get them hatched while he was around. They're trying to get him hatched while he'd gone beyond the wall. So this is not dependent on him in the slightest. I think this is actually independent of him. Okay, so that's the question from my patrons. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. Chaos Ballerina saying, why would All and Cersei have an obsession with building a marbled white city specifically? Also, it's sus that Aerys gave the twins weight in gold at birth. Yes. Also, it's you could overinterpret this, but his reaction to the news that Joanna had children was to say, I married the wrong woman, which, given the fact that his wife at that time was, from his perspective, failing to have children, and then suddenly, or failing to have his children, and then suddenly he gets news that Joanna Lannister's had children. You could interpret that as being, this woman here is having my children, but my actual wife is not. But as I say, it's possible to overinterpret that. The White City, a marbled White City, this was one of the other massive projects I talked about, the underground canal to Dawn, the building the second wall beyond the first wall. Another one of them, this is this marbled White City on the south of the river that Aerys for a couple of weeks was absolutely obsessed with. So why I think it's just one of those things that it just would be fun. I don't think that I'll have a think about it during the week. If I can think of anything that is particularly symbolic about that, I will let you know. Let's go. Northern Tommy just heading off. Good to see you. Andrew K saying the loss of dragons also explains much more prevalence of madness and erratic behavior, especially given such an intrinsic part of their existence being ripped away. Yes. Lucian saying, are there plans for a Rayella stream next? Well, I will talk about what I'm going to do next. This is so this is the end of this series on the rulers. The next week I will do a Lord of the Rings stream because it's been a while since we've done one of them. I will ask my patrons. I will put a few options in front of my patrons as to what we cover next. What we could do is we could carry on down this kind of path of rulers, and we can cover the rulers and nearly rulers and sort of rulers like Viserys and Daenerys and Rhaegar and Robert Baratheon and Joffrey and Tommen. We could carry on down this sort of rulers thing, or we could try and start picking up on perhaps looking at the different houses, like the Lannisters and the Starks, and just go deep dive into each of these and what's going on with them, or something else completely different. So I will put that to my patrons at some point in the next week or two, and what they want to do, that's what we will cover. Question from Charis Ballerina. I've noticed through these streams that Targaryen kings painted most favorite. The Targaryen kings painted most favorably have good relationships with their wives, and bad kings have terrible relationships with their wives. Is this intentional by George R. R. Martin? I don't. I mean, it's a good observation. I don't know if this is intentional by him. He doesn't sort of particularly like sort of forcing a message through his art, it has to be said. So I don't think he's trying to give us a message that if you have a good relationship with your other half, then you're a good person, or vice versa. So is that the case? So Aegon the Conqueror, I'm just going through, I'm not doubting in the slightest, but I'm just trying to get through. Aegon the Conqueror's tended to be seen as quite a good king, at least a strong king. He had relatively positive relationships with his two wives, Jaehaerys and Alysanne. They had a couple of big arguments, but yeah, they had a very strong relationship. Which other kings? Aegon V is generally treated well. He seemed to have had a good relationship with his wife. So yeah, I think that's probably a really interesting observation. Yeah. So a good marriage does seem to help Targaryens. Let's put it that way. Effective Ramblings saying, shout out for the Tolkien Toba art project on Twitter and other platforms delivering arty goodness each day of all mediums. Still time for all to hop on the train. Always happy to give shout out to artists. Carl Carsnock saying, happy wife, happy life. Weirwood saying Archmaesters. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Apologies. In terms of what we might cover in the future. Yes, the Maesters, we could possibly do that. Origins of the Citadel stream. Deep dives into the books in some way. I do this. So Commander Ray, I've done... I'm doing a very slow re-listen my way through A Song of Ice and Fire. And I've done both times when I finished a book, I've then done a deep dive into that book. So Storm of Swords, I've just read The Red Wedding, so that's how far through that I am. I've still got a little way to go, but when I finish that, I will definitely be doing a deep dive. Andrew K saying, providing balance, Andrew, thank you, saying Aenys the First seemed quite devoted to his wife, but was utterly rubbish as a king. Yes. Okay. I think with that, I will start drawing this to a close. If you are looking back at if you're watching this back a little bit later, then appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to other live streams if you would like to watch them. Appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to my Patreon page. I will be back next week with a Lord of the Rings live stream, and then a couple of weeks after that with whatever my patrons decide we should be covering. That's all for this time. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.